Very happy to see you there.
Good. Same here. Same.
हर रोज कोई न कोई इन्फिल्ट्रेशन, आतंक, जिसकी वजह से पूरी दुनिया परेशान है आप। और देश के अंदर देश की सेना के, देश के सीआरपीएफ के जवान के साथ कुछ होता है तो तुम चुप हो। अगर हमें दुश्मन समझते हैं तो हमें इससे कोई एतराज नहीं है। दुश्मनों के साथ हमने क्या करना है वो हमें मालूम है। मेरे दोस्त, मेरे साथी मुसलमान भी थे, यूपी के भी थे, गुजरात के भी थे, पारसी भी थे, सिख भी थे, लेकिन मेरे जहन में कभी ऐसी बात आई नहीं। सिर्फ देश आया और देशभक्ति आई। आज ये कहना कि मेरे परिवार के लोग हैं, आज ये कहना कि हार गया कोई या जीत गया कोई, ये सब फालतू की चीजें। सब भारत का सैनिक भारत के परिवार का हिस्सा है। ना वो यूपी का है, ना गुजरात का है, ना तमिल का है, ना उत्तर का है, ना दक्षिण का है, वो भारत का है।
Great.
Uh, that was a delightful video to honor Major General Raj Krishan Malhotra. A very warm welcome to one and all present for the important occasion to commemorate the loving memory of Major General Raj Krishan Malhotra, under whose guidance the Global Counterterrorism Council was conceived. To further honor him, we are joined by his family members and his close friends and his close professional aides. My name is Aditi Nemakal, and I am a research coordinator and a youth ambassador for the Global Counterterrorism Council, and I'm joined by my fellow youth ambassador and research coordinator, Nimish Batra. So before we move on, can we please have Mrs. Malhotra to give us a few words on General, please?
Everybody. Thanks, everyone. It's an honor to be have you all this celebrate General Malhotra's birthday on the huge and respectable platform. It's exactly the way he wanted, and it's been carrying on with these things. I'm really thankful to everybody. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for your kind words, Mrs. Malhotra. Uh, well, it's actually an honor to have you. I would now request Nimesh to kindly continue. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, Today, as Aditi said, we're honoring Major General Raj Krishna Malhotra on his birth anniversary. And we have with us an esteemed panel and members of his family who are going to uh, talk about his life, talk about his work. And without further ado, I'd like to invite or rather introduce today's dignitaries. Uh, First, we have an inaugural session, and that will remember uh, Major General Raj Krishan Malhotra. So first of all, we have Shekhar Dutt, sir. Dr. Shekhar Dutt is the patron for Global Counterterrorism Council. He has been the governor of Chhattisgarh state and has served as the Defense Secretary, Government of India between 2005 and 2007, and as the Deputy National Security Advisor. Dr. Dutt has been decorated with Sena Medal during the India-Pakistan 1971 war. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Santosh Taneja. Mr. Taneja is an RSS veteran and a close family friend of Major General Raj Krishna. Next, we have Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia, PVSN, AVSN, SM. Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia is the director of Center for Joint Warfare Studies, which was initially started by Major General Raj Krishna Malhotra. Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia, PVSN, AVSN, SM, and BAR, uh, superannuated after 40 years of distinguished service in the Army as the Director General of Military Operations, one of the most important functionaries of the Army. As the DGMO, he was directly responsible for talks with his counterparts in Pakistan to ensure sustained ceasefire, a first of its kind, and was much appreciated by the national polity. Next, we have Lieutenant General Gurmeet Singh, EVSM, UYSM, AVSM, BSM. Lieutenant General Gurmeet Singh superannuated from the Indian Army in February 2016 after nearly 4 decades of service, recipient of 4 President Awards for Distinguished Service and Gallantry, and 2 Chief of Army Staff Commendation Awards. Held prestigious appointments of Deputy Chief of Army Staff, Adjutant General, and Corps Commander 15 Corps, Srinagar. Lieutenant General Gurmeet Singh is also a family friend of Major General Raj Krishnan Malhotra. Next, we have Brigadier K.D. Malhotra, retired. He is the brother of Major General Raj Krishnan Malhotra and a distinguished army veteran. Next, we have Dr. Ashwini Malhotra. Dr. Ashwini Malhotra Kumar Malhotra is a practicing general physician with an experience of 45 years. Dr. Malhotra is the brother of Major General Raj Krishnan Malhotra. Next, we have Colonel Dr. Divakaran Padma Kumar Pillai. He is a war veteran decorated with the Shaurya Chakra. Colonel Pillai is the research fellow at Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis. He was earlier the military advisor, ICRC. He worked with Major General Raj Krishnan Malhotra in National Security Council Secretariat. We welcome all of you, our distinguished guests. Now I'd like to invite Aditi to take on with the further proceedings.
Thank you, Nimesh. So first we will start with Dr. Shekhar Dutt, under who Major General Malhotra has worked under. So Dr. Dutt, could you please take over?
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mrs. Malhotra. Good evening, Brigadier Malhotra. Good evening, Vivek. Good evening, everybody. It's a day of immense sadness for me, actually, whenever I remember and then find that Dr. Malhotra, General Malhotra is not there, because he was a true soldier, gentleman, and also a tremendous ability. He had a tremendous ability to understand the security situation and also come up with solutions. He was a practical soldier, and a soldier, to my mind, is a person who doesn't just grapple with problems, but a person who can find solutions at different problems, different solutions at different times. So flexible ability to find solutions. So he was truly one of the troubleshooters in the Ministry of Defense. He was in the Integrated Defense Headquarters. General Ritter and some of these people formed an extremely good team, and we found that there wasn't the op directives available, and General Malhotra drafted that, and we got it approved, and that was called RM's op directive. Actually, the kind of directives which are required in case of war or in case of any kind of a situation when the military has to take action. Now, I have been fortunate of working with General Malhotra in the Ministry of Defense, where I was secretary at that time, and he was in the Integrated Defense staff. And then when I moved on to the National Security Council headquarters, General Malhotra came, and he had a very good stint, and he helped all of us in drafting and getting all the standard operating practices for very, very classified operations on which we had to be. There is in the army or in the armed forces, you write down situations and then you write down what has to be done, and that was his job. And we set up the entire strategic forces, the standard operating practices, and all these. And General Malhotra, along with some other officers, was involved in that. I find that there's a dearth of, whether in civil administration or in the military, people having these kind of tremendous talent to have very, very good ability to find in each situation the way the different authorities should be working. And that is what a person who has to devise the standard operating practice would do. And I see General Vinod Bhatia here, that is what a person with military operation has to do, and these people formed an enormously good team, and I am and they and side by side kept on doing a whole lot of other activities like setting up of Senjos, which General Malhotra and some of their people, and also General Vinod Bhatia. Right now, General Vinod Bhatia is heading that institution. So it's a something wonderful, to have happened in the last so many years, and it's a big tragic thing that we are not finding General Malhotra here. I'm sure that he has trained, he has put in the basic mechanism by which by which we can tackle different kind of situations. In any case, if you see his career, he's been associated with a very large number of training institutions, starting with the Defense Service Staff College and going on with this kind of thing. I have often spoken about the difference of any organization in India at least, and many parts of the world, and the Indian Armed Forces. It's only in the armed forces where any amount of training any kind of training is also assessed by uh, by the ability to teach. So that is what General Malhotra did. He was an instructor par excellence, and I'm absolutely sure that the people, the officers he has instructed, he has been instrumental in putting them. General Gurmeet Singh has also come. The enormous benefit to the military society, and I would dare say also to the civil society, a person like General Malhotra has brought about. I miss him every day, every time, and my best wishes are there for Mrs. Malhotra, Vivek, and General Malhotra's brothers, his daughter, and every member of his family, his friends. Take care, all of you, and take care, all his friends and colleagues. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, sir, for those kind words. I'm sure his memory will live on with us. Now, I would like to call upon Mr. Santosh Taneja, who is a close family friend of General Malhotra. Sir, please.
Yes. Hello. I think I'm audible now.
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir.
थैंक यू वेरी मच. मैं अपनी बात हिंदी में रखूंगा, और मुझे लगता है कि हम सब भारतीय हैं तो समझने लायक हिंदी हम सब जानते हैं. मैं सर्वप्रथम तो धन्यवाद देना चाहूँगा विवेक जी को, कपिल जी को, टिक्कू जी को, जिन्होंने आज मुझे ऐसे प्रिय मित्र और जिन पर मैं गर्व करता हूँ उनके बारे में मुझे कुछ कहने का अवसर प्रदान किया है. मेजर जनरल राज जी से मेरा परिचय बहुत पहले का है, से अराउंड 58-59, जब वो शायद 6ठी कक्षा में पढ़ते थे और मैं लगभग 9वीं कक्षा में था. हेस्टिंग स्क्वायर में हम रहते थे और सेंट कोलम्बस स्कूल में ये पढ़ते थे. मैं डीएवी स्कूल में पढ़ता था. इनके पिताजी का भी मुझे अच्छी तरह याद है. बहुत लाइवली थे, इंजीनियर थे राष्ट्रपति भवन में, और वो भी पूरी तरह आरएसएस माइंडेड थे. और मैं भी आरएसएस की शाखा में जाता था, और साथ में राज जी को भी लेके जाता था और कपिल जी को भी लेके जाता था, और वो बड़े मन से जाते थे. मुझे अभी भी याद आता है कि छोटी छोटी लाठियां लेके जब हम जाते थे निक्कर में तो कैसा लगता था. मगर मैं सिर्फ एक छोटी सी बात कहना चाहूँगा. इस विषय को मैंने क्यों छुआ है कि आरएसएस में बाकी कुछ किसी को समझ में आता हो या ना होता आता हो, मगर देशभक्ति अगर समझ में नहीं आती तो वो आरएसएस को न जानता है, न समझता है, न वो आरएसएस में गया है। और वो जो बुनियाद हम सबको आरएसएस ने दी, यानी छत्रपति शिवाजी, महाराणा प्रताप, गुरु गोविंद सिंह जी, झांसी की रानी, सरदार भगत सिंह, सुभाष चंद्र बोस, यानी इन कैरेक्टर्स के बारे में सुनना और देश के लिए उन्होंने किस तरीके से काम किया, अपना सब कुछ दिया, ये एक नींव हमारी वहां से जरूर तैयार हुई। और मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि राज्य के परिवार में तो पिताजी नहीं, दादाजी भी और इस भाव से ओतप्रोत थे। और मुझे बहुत प्रसन्नता होती है कहते हुए कि उन्होंने सेंट कोलंबस से पढ़ने के बाद उन्होंने कोई ऐसा करियर नहीं चुना जिसमें रिस्क कम हो और ऊपर जाने की ऊंचाई ज्यादा हो। अब अगर मैं कोट करूं तो शायद कम ही ऑफिसर्स होंगे जो सेंट कोलंबस से निकले होंगे, कम ही ऑफिसर्स होंगे जो सेंट स्टीफेंस कॉलेज से निकले होंगे, मगर इनको वहां की पढ़ाई के बावजूद, चाहे तो परिवार की बैकग्राउंड कह लीजिए या इनके पूर्व जन्मों का जो कर्म था उसके कारण कह लीजिए, इनका जो भाव, पिताजी ने इनको इंजीनियरिंग कराई इसलिए एक मिडिल क्लास फैमिली से थी, ये भी हम भी थे, तो एक भाव होता है कि भाई कोई ना कोई कैरियर अचीव करने लायक कोई क्वालिफिकेशन हो जाए, शायद इसलिए थोड़ा सा देरी से उन्होंने आर्मी ज्वाइन की। मगर मैं बिल्कुल स्पष्ट हूँ इस विषय में कि वो आर्मी में इसलिए जाना चाहते थे कि इस एक सेवा में देश के लिए जान देने का भी स्कोप है। बाकी सर्विसेज में देश के लिए काम करने का स्कोप तो हो सकता है, मगर उसकी एक एसेंशियल रिक्वायरमेंट ये हो कि आप मन से और देश के लिए प्राण दे देंगे, और इससे ज्यादा जिसमें गर्व हो सके ऐसी कोई सेवा नहीं हो सकती। इसलिए उन्होंने इंजीनियरिंग करने के बाद भी इस सेवा में गए। और अभी जो हमारे मित्र बोल रहे थे कि आप जो यहाँ बैठे हैं उनकी प्रोफाइल को मुझसे ज्यादा अच्छी तरह समझते हैं। उन्होंने, जहां तक मुझे जानकारी है, किसी भी कठिन से कठिन पोस्टिंग से कभी मुंह नहीं फेरा। अगर 69-70 में उन्होंने ज्वाइन की सेवा, तो 71 का जो युद्ध था पाकिस्तान के साथ, उस युद्ध में कश्मीर क्षेत्र के अंदर वो लड़े और इस देश को विजय दिलाने में उनका भी एक हाथ है। उसके बाद नाथुला में उन्होंने पोस्टिंग ली, तवांग में उन्होंने पोस्टिंग ली। अब मेरी जब बात होती है भाभी जी से कभी, तो भाभी जी आम तौर पे एक बात कहा करती हैं कि भाई साहब वो तो घर पे रहते ही बहुत कम थे, आज मैं इधर जा रहा हूँ, आज मैं उधर जा रहा हूँ। यानी फैमिली स्टेशन पर वो सबसे कम रहे, क्योंकि उनके अंदर एक जुनून था, उनके अंदर एक पैशन था और उनके अंदर एक वीरता का अद्वितीय भाव था। वो अलग ही बने हुए थे और उस तरीके से उन्होंने अपने जीवन में पूरा करने का प्रयास किया। मैं ऐसा महसूस करता हूं कि उन्होंने अपने जीवन को अपने तरीके से जिया। अब अगर उनके गुणों की ओर मैं संकेत करना चाहूं, तो जहां उनके अंदर वीरता थी, जहां उनके अंदर डटने की, युद्ध में डटने की उनके अंदर क्षमता थी, लीड करने की उनके अंदर क्षमता थी, किसी को भी अपना बना लेने की उनके अंदर क्षमता थी, कोई भी जो उनके संपर्क में आया वो उनका बन गया, ये उनके व्यवहार में एक क्षमता थी। साथ साथ उन्होंने जो अद्वितीय काम किया वो ये है कि जब वो सेवा से मुक्त हुए उसके बाद भी लगातार उन्होंने इंटेलेक्चुअल कैपेबिलिटी उनके अंदर कितनी थी, और कोई नौकरी करने कहीं प्राइवेट सेक्टर में नहीं चले गए जहां उनको अधिक पैसा मिल सकता था, ये विदेश नहीं चले गए। वो फिर उसी देश के लिए क्या अधिक किया जा सकता है, अब डेस्क पर बैठकर क्या किया जा सकता है, रिसर्च से क्या किया जा सकता है। तो 10 साल तो पीएम ऑफिस में बैठ के उन्होंने काम किया और देश की सुरक्षा के लिए काम किया। देश की रक्षा की दृष्टि से डेस्क वर्क क्या किया जा सकता है, इंटेलेक्चुअल कैपेबिलिटी को कैसे यूज किया जा सकता है, एकेडमिक पोटेंशियल को कैसे यूज किया जा सकता है, और एक थिंकर के नाते किस तरीके से उसमें धुरी बना जा सकता है, उसमें कोर पर्सन बना जा सकता है, लोगों को साथ मोटिवेट कैसे किया जा सकता है, एनजीओ के माध्यम से कैसे काम किया जा सकता है। तो ये सारा उन्होंने अपने थोड़े से जीवन में, छोटे से जीवन में मैं कहूँगा, उन्होंने सिद्ध किया, और अंतिम दिन तक वो इस देश के लिए लड़ते हुए अपना हर मिनट दे करके गए। क्योंकि अंत में जब वो गए हैं तो वो एक सेमिनार कर रहे थे और वहां उनका स्वास्थ्य बिगड़ा और घर नहीं गए, वो सीधे हॉस्पिटल गए। मेरा कहने का भाव ये है कि ये हमारे ऐसे एक एक्सेप्शनल हमारे मित्र, हमारे साथी, हमारे परिवार जैसे सदस्य ये थे कि जिनकी हम जितनी प्रशंसा करें उतनी कम है। ऑनेस्टी उनके अंदर टू द कोर थी, नेशनल कमिटमेंट टू द सोल थी, ब्रेवरी उनके अंदर एक लॉयन जैसी थी, इंटेलेक्चुअल कैपेबिलिटी उनके अंदर मोस्ट आउटस्टैंडिंग थी। और इसके साथ साथ जो बहुत कठिन होता है, ऐसा व्यक्ति कई बार सीरियस बन जाता है। इतना खुलकर हंसते थे वो, एवर स्माइलिंग थे, ए फ्रेंड ऑफ ऑल थे। तो मुझे लगता है कि ऐसे राजकृष्ण मल्होत्रा जी को आज स्मरण करना मेरे लिए एक बड़े गर्व की बात है। और मैं इससे ज़्यादा अपनी बात नहीं कहना चाहूँगा, क्योंकि यहाँ जितने लोग बैठे हैं वास्तव में उनका संपर्क संबंध और मुझसे ज़्यादा रहा होगा। एक छोटी सी घटना और कोट कर दूंगा। वो पद लोलुप नहीं थे, यानी पद के पीछे नहीं भागते थे। मुझे स्मरण है कि उनको होम मिनिस्टर राजनाथ सिंह जी की तरफ से एक पत्र आया कि आप इस कमेटी के सदस्य बन जाइए। वो 6 लोगों की कमेटी थी। इनका मुझे फोन आया, थोड़ा बहुत मेरा जुड़ाव इस जो ये इस समय चल रही गवर्नमेंट, थोड़ा सा मेरा उनसे विचार जुड़ाव है। तो उन्होंने मुझसे पूछा कि ये मुझे क्या चाहते होंगे मुझसे। मैंने कहा मुझे नहीं पता। कहने लगे नहीं, ऐसा है कि मैं, अगर वो 6 लोगों की कोई कमेटी है जिसमें साल में 2-3 बार मिलना है, और सिर्फ मुझे ये महसूस हो कि मैं राजनाथ सिंह जी के साथ बैठा हूँ और इस कमेटी का मेंबर हूँ, तो मैं इसमें इंटरेस्टेड नहीं हूँ। क्योंकि जिन सज्जन ने मुझे फ़ोन किया था, मैंने उनसे पूछा कि भाई इसमें काम क्या है। तो कहा नहीं जी, ऐसा कोई काम नहीं है खास, 3-4 मीटिंग्स हुआ करेंगे, उसमें होम मिनिस्टर भी होंगे, आप भी होंगे, सॉरी हाँ होम मिनिस्टर भी, उस समय होम मिनिस्टर थे वो, तो होम मिनिस्टर भी होंगे, डिफेंस मिनिस्टर भी होंगे। तो कहने भाई साहब मैं तो इसके लिए ना करना चाहता हूँ, क्योंकि जिसमें काम नहीं है तो मैं क्या करूँगा वहाँ पर। अब इतनी ईमानदारी से, इतनी स्पष्टता से, अपफ्रंट होकर के, और जहाँ मैं कुछ करने के योग्य नहीं हूँ, जहाँ मेरे से कुछ काम नहीं मांगा जा रहा और सिर्फ मुझे एक अच्छा स्थान दिया जा रहा है, इतना क्लियर हेडेड होना मैं सोचता हूँ एक अच्छी बड़ी बात थी उनके अंदर। तो मैं आज उनके जन्म दिवस पर विशेष रूप से और परिवार को बधाई भी दूंगा, क्योंकि जाना तो सबको होता ही है, परंतु वो क्या फुटप्रिंट्स छोड़ के गया है, किस प्रकार से समाज में अपनी पहचान छोड़ के गया है और किस प्रकार के कर्म करके गया है। गीता तो बहुत स्पष्ट कहती है, आप लोग गीता पढ़ते होंगे, उसका 14वां अध्याय अगर आप पढ़ेंगे तो आपके ध्यान में आ जाएगा कि मनुष्य का जो भी ये जन्म है वो उसके पूर्व जन्मों के कर्म के आधार पर है। ये भगवान कृष्ण साफ कह रहे हैं। तो इस जीवन में इतना कुछ वो कर पाए और करते ही चले गए, तो स्वाभाविक रूप से आगे उनको ईश्वर ने सर्वोच्च स्थान दिया होगा ऐसा मानते हुए। और उनके जन्मदिन के अवसर पर मैं हमारी भाभी जी को, विवेक जी को, उनकी पत्नी को, बिटिया को, कपिल जी को और सभी उनके संबंधी जो आज यहाँ उपस्थित होंगे, वो हैं आज, और उनके जो ऐसे मित्र यहाँ बैठे हैं जो वरिष्ठता में मुझसे सब बड़े हैं, और शायद वो सब भी उन्हीं गुणों के धनी होंगे जो मैं इनके बारे में कह रहा हूँ। इन सब को मैं अपनी ओर से बधाई भी देता हूँ और धन्यवाद भी देता हूँ कि उन्होंने इस विशिष्ट पुरुष के बारे में मुझसे कुछ सुना और अपना समय इसमें लगाया। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
धन्यवाद श्रीमान जी। Thank you for those wise words and sharing your experiences. Now, I would like to request Lieutenant General Bhatia to please share his experiences with General Malhotra.
Thank you, Jai Hind, everyone. Mrs. Malhotra, members of Malhotra family, Dr. Shekhar Dutt, sir, it's a, thank you very much for this opportunity and honor to be speaking to this today. It's been I've been listening. I must confess that I came to meet and know General Malhotra rather late in service. It's been my loss. I heard of him the first time. There was a couple of couple of years senior, and normally, you do courses together, you meet somewhere, but it just didn't happen. Of course, Kapil and me go back nearly more than half a century now. But first time I heard of General Malhotra was in Binaguri. I was commanding a brigade there, and my general officer commanding was General Devavaram. And he would often talk about General Malhotra, who was with him in Tawang as a deputy brigade commander, which is very rare, for someone to talk so highly. He was regarded very well as a deputy commander. So that's the first I heard of him. And out from Binaguri, I got posted to the military operations director as the DDGMO Special Ops. And that time, General Malhotra was in the headquarter IDS. And that is where my interactions and my meetings, I met him. Mostly all the joint operations, we were there together. And I came to know him. He was this clarity of thought, his comprehension, his professionalism, his competence, his demeanor, his always, a very understanding attitude. He would treat you so very well. It was always a treat just going to him and just listening to him. I must confess that there was so much to learn from him, so much to absorb from him. That 1 year that I was there with him, we used to meet very often, and it's a learning experience for me. There I came to know him, and I had a lot of respect for him, a lot of regard for him. I think the reason why we are together is that we have so much of regard and respect for him as a gentleman, as a soldier, as a professional. And I must also say, as a Jat, because he belonged to the Jat regiment, and you always, you not only imbibe, you become what your regiment is all about. Let's not, deny that. So, and he was a Jat to many of these things, and he was an intellectual Jat, which was very surprising. But that is what he was. And thereafter, I was very fortunate to take over as the director, Center for Joint Warfare Studies. He was the founding director of Center for Joint Warfare Studies, the first one. And of course, Dr. Shekhar Dutt is here. He's the mentor of St. George. He's the one who started this. It is because of him that the center came up, him and General Linder, the two of them, and he still continues to mentor us. We will look up to him for everything. And every day when I enter the office, the first thing I see is the board, and the first name on the board is that of General Malhotra. So that is I'm very fortunate to have followed him in his footsteps many years down the line after having met him. I can narrate quite a few professional interactions, but I'll refrain from that. We conducted the first joint special forces exercise when he was looking after the operation headquarter IDS. And it was very difficult because the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the headquarter IDS was just about development in 2005. And it was that time when he had to get the things moving. And the way he got everyone on board, I was very sure that the exercise will not go through because we were pulling in different directions at that point of time. That is why headquarters was established. But because of him, he could convince you, he could take you on board, he could get everyone together. And that was, I think, a great quality in him. And he did not try to confront. He took us along together, and he told us, he convinced us that this was the right way ahead. So that is how I remember General Malhotra. Hats off to him. I salute him for his many contributions to the Indian Armed Forces, his many achievements at the personal level, even during service and post-retirement. I have always looked up to him as a senior, as a soldier, as an officer, as an intellect. And I will now stop out here, and thank you very much. I wish the family the very best, and today is a great day. And thank you for this honor. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, sir, for your memorable experiences. Before I move on to the following speakers, I would just like to request the speakers to keep within the time, because of time constraints, to keep within 2 to 3 minutes. So now I'd like to call upon Lieutenant General Gurmeet Singh to please share his experiences with General Malhotra.
जय हिंद। आज के शुभ दिन पर जब जनरल राजकृष्ण जी का जन्मदिन है, मैं शिव जी के असूलों के मुताबिक सिर्फ उनके जो त्रिशूल के मुताबिक सिर्फ 3 ही बातें करूंगा। पहला कि जनरल साहब ने जीसीटीसी के फाउंडर मेंबर थे और सेंजो की स्थापना की, और दोनों ही वृक्ष आज की स्थिति में बहुत अच्छा काम कर रहे हैं। अभी अभी कुछ दिन पहले ही 26 अगस्त को जीसीटीसी ने अपना 4th एनिवर्सरी मनाया, और जिस स्थिति पर वो पहुंच गए हैं, बहुत गर्व की बात होती है। और इसलिए इस गर्व से ज्यादा जरूरी ये है कि जब शुरू हुआ था तो उस वक्त में किन कर्म और किन कार्यों के कारण आज स्थिति आई है, उसको याद करते हैं तो बहुत खुशी होती है। दूसरी बात, जब भी जनरल राजकृष्ण जी को मिले हैं, उनको देखा है, तो एक मैं तो ऐसे कहूंगा, उनकी अब जब मैं फोटो देखता हूं, यूट्यूब में सुनता हूं उनको, तो बिल्कुल एक टाइगर की तरह नजर आते हैं। वो एक बहुत ही ऊंचे दर्जे के सोल्जर थे, एक स्कॉलर थे, लेकिन उससे भी बढ़कर वो एक अच्छे मेंटर और गाइड थे। इनफैक्ट एक सोल्जर और स्कॉलर होना, और उसका बढ़कर एक मेंटर और गाइड होना, और राष्ट्र की सुरक्षा के लिए ऐसा काम करना, ये बहुत विरले विरले ही करते हैं। और तीसरी बात ये है कि उनकी जो पैशन थी, जो नेशनल सिक्योरिटी, जियो पॉलिटिक्स और काउंटर टेररिज्म पर, वो काबिले तारीफ थी। इनफैक्ट मेरी नजर में तो जो ऐसे योद्धा होते हैं, वो कभी भी मरते नहीं हैं, वो अमर होते हैं। मेरे लिए तो आज भी वो जीवित हैं, मेरे परिवार का हिस्सा हैं। और इस घड़ी में विनाक्षी जी को, ब्रिगेडियर मल्होत्रा, केडी मल्होत्रा को, और पूर्ण परिवार के सदस्य, और पूर्ण जीसीटीसी और सेंजो, और जितने भी वीर योद्धा हैं भारत में, सबकी तरफ से ऐसे आत्मा को, ऐसे व्यक्ति को, ऐसे अमर सोल्जर को नमन करता हूं। और बहुत खुशी है कि आज हम सब ने मिलकर उनको इस श्रद्धा से रिमेम्बरेंस और रेवरेंस किया है। जय हिंद।
Thank you so much, sir, for your kind words. Now I would like to request Brigadier K.D. Malhotra to please share his experiences with General Malhotra.
नमस्कार सब मनोवाणी को जो यहाँ पे आए हैं, मेरा हार्दिक अभिनंदन कि आपने वक्त निकाला है। परिवार की ओर से मैं सिर झुका के आप सबका आदर करता हूँ और वेलकम करता हूँ। मेरे भाई साहब एक ढाल थे, वो एक सोल्जर थे, एक स्कॉलर थे और एक संत भी थे, जो मैं उनको बहुत नज़दीक से देखता था। कोई भी कठिन काम हो उसके लिए हमेशा तैयार रहते थे। इसलिए उन्होंने जो अपनी बटालियन कमांड की वो नाथुला में की, और ब्रिगेड जो उन्होंने कमांड की वो तवांग में कमांड की। So and he was very dexterous with many languages, very proficient, and he was always in the forefront of the most difficult tasks. And like I said, he was a chief. Everybody has said such wonderful words about him and reminisced about such wonderful things about him. I, with a deep sense of gratitude, bow my head. Thank you very much. Because of time constraint, I won't say more. Thank you and dhanyavad. Jai Hind. And I really miss him. I really miss him today.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm sure his memory will live on with us. Now I would like to request Dr. Ashwini Malhotra to please share his experiences with General Malhotra.
Hello, everybody. Good evening to all, and I think this is a wonderful occasion to meet and to celebrate Raj Papa, as we used to call him in our family, and being the endless. This is a time to celebrate all whatever he stood for, whatever he was doing, and of course, um, fir- first and foremost, he did everything from his heart. Whatever he did everything from his heart. And as General Saab said, like a lion, never went back, never moved moved back, always led from the front, and had a big vision. And we are so happy that all the children of the family are following his vision and doing so much for the country. And I'm sure he is going to be very, very happy with the whole family, whatever they are doing in all parts of the world and for the country. And this is all that I have to say, keeping the timing constraint in mind. Thank you very much, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, for being here and celebrating.
Thank you so much, sir, for those kind words. Now I would like to call upon Colonel Dr. Divakaran Padmakumar Pillai to share his experiences with General Malhotra.
Respected Mrs. Malhotra, Joy, Sumida, family members, and distinguished members of GCTC, and all those listening in, and respected Shekhar Dutt, sir. It's a matter of great honor for me to be here to be honoring General Malhotra, with whom I have had a who had a great impact on my personal life. And it's my first opportunity to speak to this, and I'm really grateful for Aditya Tikku for allowing me to speak here. For me, he was a great man, just as we have learned from all others. Personally, we are remembering his greatness. His greatness lies that there was no cheap rhetoric about him. And like what his Malhotra just said, Dr. Malhotra, there was like everything that he did it with like a lion in great style. But he did everything willingly. There was no half measures. He never appropriated anything that was not rightfully his. And his service life was not something of comfort and privilege. He had actually chosen, like what Mr. Tandon had told us. He chose a life after a very eminent school like Columbus and St. Stephen. He chose a life of hardship and sacrifice, and that's what defines him. He was a great flame, and he burned bright, and he spread his warmth. And we've heard many stories of his warmth, and I personally have experienced it because I never knew him when I was selected for the National Security Council. But the army and its bureaucratic ways had not allowed me to join it. And it was General Malhotra's sheer insistence and perseverance that actually saw me. He saw the spark in me, and he allowed that spark to flourish where I am today. I owe my this orbital leap that I got 7 years that I got to serve in the National Security Council with very distinguished people, and that's where I stand here. So if you ask me what he was, he can be defined as a warrior, he can be defined as a general, he can be a distinguished statesman. He's an elderly veteran who didn't choose to go to the private sector to serve in the National Security Council, who was wise advice, was sought by statesmen and the who's who of our country, like Dr. Shekhar Dutt just mentioned that he had his hand. He brought a unique flavor to a lot of things which we are really privileged, and we've seen it actually implemented as policy. I'll conclude with this thing about an ancient Indian thought, which says that you don't measure your greatness by the number of palaces or your wealth that you leave behind, but the people whose lives you've influenced. And I personally am here a testimony as an individual that his life, he lives on in my gratitude and my affection and my love, as he does in many thousands of others whose lives he has touched. So here I am very grateful to you that you've given me this honor to speak here and remember him. And with warmest regards and affection to Mrs. Malhotra and the family members and to all other distinguished members of the GCTC, I am grateful to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your wise words. Thank you all thanks to all the speakers for sharing their memorable experiences. I'm sure his memory will live on with us. So now I'll be handing it over to my fellow research coordinator and youth ambassador, Nimish Patra. So,
Good evening, all distinguished panelists. So we'll move on with the first session planned for today. The overarching theme for this session is Indo-China relations 5 years from now. And we will be focusing on geopolitics. So without much ado, I'd like to introduce the panel. First, we have Lieutenant General Satish Dua, PVSM, UYSM, SM, VSM, former GOC 15 Corps and former Chief of Integrated Defense Staff to the Chairman of CISC of the Indian Armed Forces. He is considered a counter-terrorism specialist and has held various important commands, staff, and instructor appointments during his career. He has commanded a battalion and a brigade in the counter-terrorism operations in Jammu and Kashmir and the 15 Corps. General Dua is also on the Executive Council Board of GCDC. We welcome you, sir. Next, we have Mr. Krishan Verma. Mr. Verma, a former civil servant, superannuated from the post of Special Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat, Government of India in 2012. During an illustrious career spanning 35 years, he held several key appointments within the country and abroad. His diplomatic assignments include postings to countries in South Asia, East Asia, and the USA. He is also the recipient of awards for distinguished and meritorious service from the Prime Minister of India and several commendation letters for outstanding performance during his career. Mr. Krishan Verma is on the advisory board of GCDC. Next, we have Ambassador Suresh Goyal, IFS, a veteran officer with over 35 years in diplomatic services of India. Shri Suresh K. Goyal has spent more than 10 years of his career in Southeast Asia, in Singapore, Malaysia, Laos, and China. He has worked actively on India-ASEAN partnership for 5 years. He served in the Permanent Mission of India in New York from 1991 to 1995, where he worked on peace and security-related issues. He retired in 2013 as Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs and Director General of Indian Council of Cultural Relations, and is currently working on the India and China relationship in Indo-China. Next, we have Professor Alka Acharya. Professor Acharya is the Professor of Chinese Studies in the Center for East Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has been teaching courses on Chinese foreign policy and political economy to the master's and MPhil students and guiding doctoral research since 1993. She was earlier the Director, Institute of Chinese Studies. She has written widely on India-China relations and other aspects of China's foreign policy. Next, we have Professor Shrikant Kondapalli. Dr. Shrikant Kondapalli is Chair and Professor, Center for East Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is also an honorary fellow at ICS, Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi, and Research Associate at Center for Chinese Studies, University of Stellenbosch, South Africa. He served at the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi, for nearly 12 years. He is educated in Chinese studies in India and China with a specialization in modern Chinese history. Dr. Kondapalli is also a distinguished fellow IPCS. We welcome you, sir. Finally, we have the moderator for today's event, Cleo Pascal ma'am. She is a non-resident senior fellow at FDD focusing on the Indo-Pacific region. Cleo works with academia, government, the defense community, and others in order to better understand, explain, anticipate, and resolve today's complex challenges. She is particularly interested in the strategic implications of the intersection of geopolitical, geoeconomic, and geophysical change. With this, I'd like to hand over the rest of the proceedings to Cleo Pascal ma'am. Ma'am, please continue.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank GCTC for the privilege of being able to moderate these memorial sessions. I had a privilege last year of giving the memorial lecture for Major General Malhotra, which time I met his family, and I'd like to pay my respects to them. As everybody here knows, a military person is one part of the sacrifice that his family makes for the country and for making us all safer. And I'm very grateful. I'm not Indian, but what India is doing to keep the region safe and us all safer is being appreciated, and that comes down to every individual service person and to their family. And in that spirit, what we're going to do in this session is we're going to take some of the characteristics of Major General Malhotra, his solution-focused vision and leadership to try to look forward 5 years. So what I'd ask the panelists to do is, first of all, talk about where if nothing changes, where we're likely to be in 5 years, where you'd like us to be in 5 years, and how we can get there from here. So what needs to happen over the next 5 years for us to get to where you'd like to be in 5 years in the India-China relationship? We need to, right now we're in a situation where it's very reactive, kind of waiting for China to push or do something or shoot or do something like that. But is there a way that India can take control of the situation more clearly and start to shape the strategic environment in a way that's safer for India and for us all? So we'll go through the speakers in the orders that they were presented, and if everybody could speak for maybe 6 or 7 minutes, and then that'll give us time to come back through and all the speakers can respond then to some of the other things that they've heard. So first would be Lieutenant General Dua, if you'd like to lead us off and give us a bit of vision for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Cleo. And it's nice to be here. I also would like to start by paying my respects to General Malhotra, in whose memory and honor we've organized this event. So it's an honor. It's a pleasure to be here. I did not know him personally, but one has heard of him. And so in that spirit, allow me to start this by saying I will be brief. India-China, before I say that where we would like to be, I want to point out a basic fact, which is purely my view, and I've written about it in a couple of articles. China has land borders with 14 countries. China has resolved the land borders with every other country, except India. Some of you may want to point out Vietnam, and I choose my words with care. That is, I'm talking about land borders. So, and my view is, my take is, that China does not want to resolve the land borders with India. Why? China sees us as a natural competitor in many fields. And to this audience, I don't think I need to belabor the point, whether it is commerce, trade, military, oceans, everywhere, and in the other fields that are emerging, technological fields as well, though we have a lot of catching up to do. So perhaps this gives him a leverage. China has huge strategic issues in this part of the country where we are having trouble today, in Ladakh and further to the north, where it is going through the CPEC issue, where it is Xinjiang, all that. We are aware of that part of this geostrategy. I won't talk about it. But the fact is that China does not want to resolve, so that and that is why every 2 or 3 years we see something happening. Now that China has given up its peaceful rise phase and perhaps is embarking a little more brashly on the phase of replacing, stated aim of replacing US as a sole superpower by 2049, we see that in 2013-14, it was Depsang Chumar. You know, the face-offs have started over last 1 decade or so. In 2017, it was Dolam at the India-China-Bhutan border, where again India stood firm. And now in 2020, we all know what's happening over the past few months. Okay, so this is, although this is a tactical issue, I just wanted to round that up as to why, in my view, it is not, there are no easy answers, and it is there is more to it than meets the eye. It's not only Ladakh, or it's not only Galwan or Pegong Su. Okay, where do we see ourselves from here? Best case and worst case. Let me just sum up the worst case, that we just don't, we can't patch up, and we get into a conflagration which is beyond what is happening today. But the best case would be, and perhaps a little more pragmatic way of doing things would be, that in next 5 years, let us say we cannot iron out the pinpricks. There will be pinpricks, but in the larger overarching framework, if we can engage and sort of manage to coexist in the same space in the entire Indo-Pacific, if we come to a better understanding, it will be better for this entire region if we don't get into a conflagration at every possible opportunity. How do we go there? And the topic of military, political, diplomacy, all these elements, all these instruments of power, if they are going to be dovetailed together, I think that is the way to be. Especially in countries, there are some countries which lend themselves more to a military, political, diplomatic combine than others. In countries where military is in a preeminent position, for instance, all the communist or erstwhile communist countries have military in a eminent position in their country. There are several other countries, Pakistan, for instance, for different reasons, has militaries in preeminent position. So here is where military and diplomacy can actually can have a more vigorous mix to decide things. Politically, obviously, political angle is a common denominator, an overarching factor in all these cases. Now, I mean, I'll take the example. Mr. Goel has been serving in all these countries. He would agree. He's going to be speaking soon, and he and I have served together, and I was fortunate to serve with him in Laos. Now, in all such countries, if you take the military strand along with the diplomacy, it can serve better dividends. The point I'm trying to make here is, rather than keep them in silos, or I won't say silos, but rather than, or shall we say that we can exploit this combined better. And in our country, I think we need to do more in terms of combining these elements of power. We need to have an overarching strategy, a guidance document, call it national security strategy, defense strategy, or something, which sadly India has, our country, we are yet to articulate one. Most major military or most countries have articulated by some name or the other a guidance document which provides a guidance to all instrument of power to draw their own objectives and move towards it. So I would like to end here by saying that we need to get a little more pragmatic. We need to combine our powers well, and the most important part would be, I'll take one more minute to talk about it, is the fact that while India has no aspirations beyond its borders, so what do we need to do outside? In the realm of Indian Ocean, in the realm of South China Sea, or the overall Indo-Pacific, since we have no aspirations beyond our borders, then we need to get into arrangements, alliance, groupings, so that we can have convergence of interest with countries that we have convergence of interest, groups, whether it's Quad, IFTA. There are so many other groupings that we can talk of, whether it is only diplomatic, trade related, or with some kind of a strategic military understanding between the countries. Those kind of arrangements are required. In today's world, no one, not even the US, can go it alone. I mean, you do need partners and arrangements. And I suppose that is the way to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent way of starting off. We talk a little bit about how just military alone, obviously, would be extremely difficult. China itself uses this comprehensive national power approach to suffuse a country with its interests. So what you're talking about in terms of military, the political, and the alliances, and creating a much broader based strategy for protection is would be extremely helpful. And I think Mr. Verma, who's with us now, can perhaps talk a little bit more about that, especially from the political perspective. Mr. Verma, over to you.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, GCTC, for inviting me to this panel. A very distinguished set of people, and I think a very befitting occasion when we are paying respects in memory of General Malhotra, who again I hadn't had the privilege of meeting or being introduced to, but I've heard so much about him. So I think it's great on the part of GCTC to organize a series of webinars to commemorate his memory. Let me plunge straight into this topic. I think General Dua has sort of laid out a very nice framework of where he's seeing how the relationship could be fashioned over the period, the next 5 years. I would like to take a lead from where he left off by bringing in a little factual accounts of what is actually has been happening, and from there try to, in the next 25 minutes,
project what the scenario would be like in the next 5 years in terms of bilateral relations, and perhaps a little extension from a bilateral to a regional, because at least I think India in the times to come may not be aspiring to become a global power, but certainly would like to be a little more in control of the region and the politics of the region and the military of the region. I think so. Let's go back first to understanding what China is doing, because I think that's the most important thing. They are a lead player in this part of the world. They are beginning to follow the narrative in many areas, whether it's politics, whether it's diplomacy, whether it's military, by sheer dint of economic and military power, and to a state where they are beginning to project that in terms which they had not done earlier, thanks to the sort of foresight of leaders like Deng Xiaoping. But they are beginning to bear their fangs now. So what are we looking at in terms of bilaterals, and then try and see where we are going to be? I think India has all along, right through from the time we had our independence and they got theirs, has been very friendly. Have been in fact, I would blame them for India for that matter for being sort of appeasing the Chinese on every front. We have allowed them to go in. We've allowed them to take care of some of our interests at our costs. They have gradually come in, whether it was politics, whether it was military, whether it was the boundary issue, whether it was diplomacy, everywhere. I think they've taken advantage of a very friendly, very sanguine kind of a country, which has looked at the world in very philosophical terms, while they were going in a very concrete strides to sort of regain their place in what they ordained as the Middle Kingdom. And they have been ruthlessly pursuing this right through, whether it was Mao, whether it was subsequent leaders that came in. Every one of them had their own way. Perhaps they differed in style and in terms of, but in terms of objectives, I don't think any single leader in the Chinese hierarchy has ever let go of the fact that they are a very proud nation, and the world has done them no good, and they need to regain their place in society. So I think we were easy picking in many ways. It's a large country. We are competitive in many ways. They see you as a power which has the potential to challenge them in this part of the world. But at the same time, they have seen us, and this is based on my times in Beijing and from what we used to hear from the think tanks associated with the Ministry of State Security and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the security apparatus. As a country which is good, rich, big, they have to do business with you, but at the same time, you're way behind them, and you will not be able to catch up as a result. You will not be a competitor, but nevertheless, since you are of your size, they will keep you occupied. They will keep talking to you from time to time, but really not care much about your interests. I think what bothers them through the whole period of history, since the 50s, I would say, is the fact that Tibet was an issue, and it's a core concern for the Chinese. It remains a core concern for the Chinese, and that we had the Dalai Lama and the whole lot of Tibetan refugees who fled from there and took refuge in India. That's a problem for them. They can't, even if you're not allowing him to do anything other than just typical work over here or spiritual work, they just cannot understand and see why an enemy, as they look at him, would be given succor and refuge in a country which overtly says that they are friendly, despite whatever effort we are doing. So that's one of the problems that we have. I think the second fear that I detected over the years studying China was the fact that you're a democracy, you're monoline, therefore you can move anywhere. They don't like the idea of just like the US are a little wary about being people who are not taking sides in black and white. And so the Chinese also looked at you, and because of your democratic credentials, they see a natural corollary of yours to be able to extend your relationships in the democratic world. In the democratic world, a large part of it is a very developed world. And so they see you in coming in concert with those at some stage or the other and posing a threat to them. This is something that it is in their psyche. You just cannot remove it. You can say anything to them, but they will not. They just believe these are the two fundamental areas. As a result, there's been a history of irritating you in a way. They have pandered to their own sense of imperialism and sense of arrogance in a way, and also try to keep you in the box in South Asia, equating you with countries like Pakistan. So they have used the hostilities the Pakistanis have had over the years, built up a nexus with them, which is a very, very dangerous kind of a nexus. It does not only need political support or a moral support or a diplomatic support, it's much deeper. I mean, we know about the military help and aid that goes in there. We know the nuclear cooperation that goes in there. We are now beginning to see that even in an area which hurts the Chinese eventually, which is international terrorism, they are very soft on Pakistan. As long as Pakistan uses those militants against India, they're quite happy with looking the other way, and they have taken position in the UN on those guys. So they've not let anything go by which it actually creates a problem for you, and that India remains a little off balance till the 70s, 60s, late 60s, 70s. They were in fact quite involved in stoking and fomenting insurgency movements in India. Look at the Northeast; they were right there. They were doing this. Even now, there are suspicions that they're probably aiding the LWE from some way or the other. We can't put your hand on it because they're smart and they're clever. They know how to put in many sort of firewalls before you can get there. But the fact is that there is we know that there is trade going on. We know that there is a leadership which is hostile to India from the Northeast, which is taking refuge in China, in Yunnan and Myanmar, the Boot Treaty. We have got evidence about arms and ammunition coming in from the Northeast, from places like this. They call them rogue Chinese, but I don't know. We know Norinco is quite involved in all this kind of a thing. We know how it comes. There have been people like Anthony Shimre who have given you a great account of how they picked up arms and ammunition and have brought it to Bangladesh and into India. So there are so many evidence that we have which show that the Chinese have been hostile to us. They bring in a very, very benign kind of gesture on the top where they are nice and friendly to you. They talk the kind of language you like to hear, but I think under the surface, below the surface, there's a tremendous amount of mistrust that is developed in these two countries. So as we go forward, and as we are seeing what they've done in eastern Ladakh, especially, and again, Bhutan and all along the border, whether it's Uttarakhand, right through all the three sectors, I don't think there's ever been a letter by the Chinese anything. We have actually made a lot of concessions. And I say this very deliberately, concessions that we've given to them. I don't see anything coming back from the Chinese at all. Whether it is in the space of politics, whether it's space of military, whether it is space in the border, whether it is even economics, whether it is even social. I mean, it's always a one-way street. And that's the way they've liked it, and that's the way they've played India. I think it's now a wake-up time for this country. We've suddenly understood that this country is full of deceit. They're deceptive in their movements. And we need to now begin to counter them. And I'm glad the kind of stand that has been taken up in Ladakh is the kind of stand we'll take. Because of the differential in the economic strength of the two countries, we perhaps cannot take them on single-handedly. And I think we need to work with other democracies. We need to work with other countries, like the Quad is something that I think. And I would in fact even go through the Quad Plus, which I have enunciated in many of my articles. That I think it's about time that we got in Taiwan. Why are we wary? Why are we shy? When the Chinese can come and play with everybody around you, why are we the ones who actually are very careful about how we deal with China? They have none of your interests in mind when they do things as we do it. So I think we have to step out of this. So when you ask me to see, look into the ball and say, what do you look at in 5 years down the line in cross relations, right across politics? I think there is a period of stress that this tension will grow. I don't think the Chinese front, especially under this leadership and with the kind of targets that they've got in 21, 25, 35, 49, they've all been enunciated very clearly. None of them actually work towards you and your interests. So I think we have to come along and be able to develop our own confidence in national strength, which we are doing, self-reliance in the industry, whether it's manufacturing, defense, and a host of other areas. Develop alternative trade patterns, We've got to start looking at how we could improve our manufacturing base to get into the overall global supply chain, whether we could offer that kind of permit for people to come in. Things like that we have to do. And all of these that I'm saying, whether you're looking east, whether into ASEAN or you're looking Indo-Pacific, you're looking at the Indian Ocean region, which is much closer to us in terms of looking for minerals, oil, gas, energy sector, you are definitely going to come into contention with China. So this little bonhomie or whatever you would like to call it is very short-lived. I'm glad it's come earlier than it's come later. And I think India is beginning to roll back. So I think we are looking at next 4 or 5 years as one of contention, of tension, of stress. Let me leave it here and then maybe I can pick it up later. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that extremely useful summary of the different ways that China has tried to hobble India. It seems sometimes that China appreciates India's potential more than some in India do sometimes, and has been trying to make sure that India doesn't live up to that potential. And perhaps Ambassador Goel, who has been on the front line of a lot of this, can talk about some of the ways that over the next 5 years, India can be the India that it needs to be and should be and deserves to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cleo, and thank you, GCTC, for inviting me to take part in this very interesting discussion. And like others, let me also begin by paying tribute to General Malhotra. Very interesting subject, geopolitics of India and China relations and 5 years down the line. Let me begin with a bit of a premise, really, which has been often the context of an assumption of relationship between India and China. It has always been said by everyone practically that these good relations are civilizations and anchored in deep ties of friendship, etc., etc. I would say the reality is entirely different. The only one area where the relationship between India and China has been kind of amicable or friendly is the point of Buddhism, really. Travel from India through Nepal and Myanmar to China, came back to Tibet, etc., etc. But if we take Buddhism out, where is that kind of common intersection point between India and China? I find none. Indo-China has a history of contest between India and China all the time, whether it is commercial, political, cultural, or in terms of Buddhism, or the contest between Hinduism and Buddhism. Therefore, we must contest that as major influences, not as just geographical units, but as cultural civilizational units in Asia. India and China have always been rival for influence regionally and globally as the globe existed at that time. Therefore, what is happening now is an extension of that history and how they have seen each other over a period of time. Coming from that, really speaking, I would now venture to suggest that China and India, or India and China, what is happening now, as General Satish Dua said, China is not interested in finding a resolution to the border dispute, because it is not really the border dispute which is the problem between the two countries. It can be resolved if China shows sufficient interest. The real issue between China and India is that China would not like to see the emergence of a competitor for influencing the region, whether it is economic, political, strategic, or either way. Therefore, China, and that's a reason that over a period of time, China has shown no inclination even to identify where the LAC actually is located or delineate it over the map. They have not shown no interest. In fact, they keep on going back and forth over these things. Therefore, we should look at the border dispute as a kind of a symptom of this problem between India and China rather than the reason for the relationship between India and China. So if we go on to the point that it's a historical rivalry and China would not like to see a competitor emerge as a contestant for influence in the region, then we need to go beyond that as to what the present day reality is. The present day reality is that China is interested in India to the extent that it offers a very attractive marketplace, both for its products and for its investment. As soon as that attraction is, or that area is threatened, comes under attack, China begins to see red there. So besides economy, besides trade, China really will then like to see India as a weaker nation, politically and strategically in the region. And as if it sees India becoming stronger, China will do everything possible to show its place, to basically bring India down and make sure that it does not come into the position to contest. Last point, I will be very brief again. Where do we see this happening over the next 5 years? A lot really would depend on how the economies of India and China perform. Please bear in mind the fact that even a military power requires a strong economy to sustain that military power. If China's economy goes down, all the plans they have got in mind for a stronger PLA would need to be supported by somewhere else, and that's impossible. Similarly, India would depend upon a strong economy for their own military to be supported. Therefore, the first thing that really is, where do the economies go? The COVID-19 has taken a huge toll. However, what I see is China is recovering very fast. The problem that China will face is the coalition that is now emerging. We see China as a possible threat to the global order as the world has known so far, and therefore practically trying to blockade China's and put ban on the Chinese products, Chinese investment, Chinese companies, as practically everybody has been doing. Will it affect Chinese economy? I do not know. China has begun to focus on the domestic consumption greatly. Now it is around more than 50% of the GDP comes from the domestic consumption. If China is able to survive this global challenge in the economy, China will grow faster. As it is, even this quarter, China has grown rather than going down. India has gone down by 23%. So what I see now emerging is the economic contest between the two. If India is able to recover the economic ground in the coming years, then India is in a position to offer a tough contest to China in the region and globally. What it would require, in addition to just India and the military power, because technology is changing very fast, the country's viewpoints are changing very fast. Given everything, I do not think that even with a growing global economy, that China can be dealt with alone or by just one country. There is a need for a greater alliance to emerge to deal with China's disruption, so to say. There is, you may call it the coalition of willing. There are several alignments which are emerging. So in the next 5 years, we are possibly going to see emergence of different alignments, different coalitions, both at the contest and the loggerheads with each other. How they are going to deal with will depend upon their joint economic strength and the capacity to convert that economic strength into the strategic strength. So there is a big if, there is a lot of uncertainty, difficult to predict anything at all, but yes, we are coming into very, very choppy waters, so to say, over the next 5 years. Thank you, and I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Goel. Very helpful addition of the economic aspect to the political and the military, and the key for us to all work together. I noted the supply chain resilience initiative being proposed by India, Japan, and Australia, and those sorts of bright lights might lead us to the sort of economic underpinning that you're talking about in terms of being able to support the strategic issues, because as you very rightly said, China's not going to stop. So the question is, that's the constant. So the question is, can the rest of us adjust around China to at least create some more security? And for another kind of even more holistic view, if we could go to Professor Acharya, who looks at these issues in a very complex way as well. Thank you very much. Professor Acharya? I saw her.
You're on mute. You're on mute. Kindly unmute yourself.
Okay, done.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Cleo, and thanks to the organizers and Aditya for inviting me to this very interesting webinar in the memory of a great soldier of India, and so I offer my salute to him. Now, you have said that we should speak not more than 5 or 6 minutes, so I'm going to be very, very telegraphic in my presentation so that we can open up issues for discussion. Now, since the time is limited, I really cannot take on the assumptions on the basis of which the earlier speakers have made their entire argument. China does not want to resolve the boundary dispute, and that's the bottom line. The boundary dispute is just a fig leaf. It is actually about contestation for power. Now, I do not share these assumptions partially, and I will explain why I believe that these assumptions are not going to be very helpful in enabling us to devise the strategy for dealing with the crisis that India-China relations have come to at this point in the next 5 years. And so the vision that we are trying to think about, or at least try and ideate on that, has to proceed from an understanding of the situation in which we find ourselves. Now, 2020 has ignited trends, the impact of which will be evident many, many years down the road. It is just not at all clear at this point what is the shape of things going to be, either at the global level or at the regional level. Certainly not in the short term. We are not going to be able to get a good sense of how different alignments, how different organizations, how different countries will be positioned vis-a-vis each other, and Ambassador Goyal has referred to that. The policies of all the major powers at this point are in a huge flux. There are uncertainties galore. What appears to be feasible today goes out of the window tomorrow. And that's partly also because of the pandemic, but also due to the fact that we have come to the end of an extremely volatile phase in the politics of the existing leading power of the world, which is the United States. And during these 5 years, what we have seen is a big assault on the existing international economic and political architecture by the United States. I mean, none of the institutions at the global level they appear to be almost pushed into irrelevance, and therefore their effectiveness as institutions are obviously under severe threat. So I think the first major issue that we need to figure is the coming transition in the international order, and where do we want to be in that process of transition? How are we going to play our role in what is clearly going to be a reshaping of the major institutions? How do we play it as an emerging country in our own right? How do we play it in combination with other countries with whom we have similar interests? And how do we play this role both in terms of a leader and a very effective shaper? I think that's the first challenge, and therefore our vision should be tailored to address those kind of challenges that will be coming. Now, when we talk of 5 years, obviously it's a short-term kind of a perspective that we are taking. Is it a medium-term perspective? Short-term, if we, by short-term, we mean the immediate context, then of course it's a different issue. But if we are talking in terms of a 5-year vision, it's a short to medium-term kind of a perspective. Now we start our assessment of what is possible at this juncture in a situation of power asymmetry, which is greatly in China's favor. Now, the question is that in this short term, or short to medium term of 5 years, are we likely to see a shift, a qualitative shift in this asymmetry? Unlikely. By many kind of assessments, India is placed either 10 years behind China in terms of comprehensive national power. The more optimistic ones put it at around 5 to 7 years. The more pessimistic ones put it at more than 10 years. So clearly, even as we get our act in order, even as we work on policies like Atmanirbhar Bharat and go towards strengthening our own capacities, things are not going to change very drastically in the 5 years, particularly because of 2020, the pandemic. And that's really put a big kind of a question in. Now, so if we are saying that we will be operating still in this kind of an asymmetric power situation with China, then what are the possibilities? Now, we can quickly, what I will do is quickly look at the bilateral, the regional, and the global. If we take the official discourse at this point, we see both at the military level and at the diplomatic and political level, two very different kinds of voices coming out. In fact, we do not see any clear-cut policy in favor of this or that kind of a situation. All that we are sensing is that there is still a great deal of turbulence ahead. The situation is very delicately poised. Indian objectives vis-a-vis the Chinese capturing of our territory are going to face an uphill task in terms of getting our objectives through. And so that is really, I feel that the short term is going to be preoccupied by settling this bilateral issue in whatever way it is. And we've seen already the foreign minister, we have seen other senior diplomats talk in terms of continuing with the diplomatic process. So clearly, between those options, as the CDS said, that the military option is very much on the table, I think there is, a bit of a disjuncture, as it were, and a lack of clarity as to how, in this short term, are we going to get the bilateral issue solved. But as I see it, the diplomatic engagement process is the foot that is being put forward, and that will continue. And other speakers have also referred to the fact that in this immediate context, we need to engage, we need to coexist, we need to sort out this problem without resort to an option which could easily flare up into a big conflagration. Now, regionally, we can see that again there are serious challenges as far as the entire Asian century and its prospects were like. All that seems to be clear is that most of the Asian countries are keen to come together and get over this pandemic through collaborative strategies. But that's quite clear. And in this kind of a situation, we have seen that the issues that are arising, and this is not just at the regional level, of course, globally, that you look at climate change, or you look at extremism, you look at the pandemic, migration, there are a large number of challenges which will need transnational cooperation and collaboration. So while the rethink of the international architecture is going on, there's also a rethink in terms of how these collaborative strategies have to be fashioned. What kind of alliances are we going to build with whom? What are going to be the objectives? I think this will need a lot of thinking. A lot of effort has to go to strategize and devise the way in which we will pursue our objectives with different countries. And as was mentioned, by General Dua, that you need to take this political, diplomatic, and military kind of combine together and explore the options. So the two things which India will have to be very careful about at the regional level, which is that we do not see the Chinese losing out very significantly in the regional theater. In fact, in the immediate aftermath and in the context of the pandemic, the protectionist policies that have been followed by the US have brought China very firmly back into the picture. In fact, a lot of countries now are looking to China, and China has posted the best growth so far in the post-pandemic phase, looking to China to bring out solutions which can help them revive their economies. So we are likely to see a greater influence of China in the Asian context, notwithstanding the pressures generated by the South China Seas, notwithstanding the kind of tensions that are arising out of China's assertiveness. China is playing this game rather well, where it is pushing its economic agenda, even as it is securing its strategic flank. So finally, then how do we look at the next 5 years? I would say that given the fact that China's presence in India is something that cannot be removed overnight. Its presence is much more into the Indian fiber than is acknowledged or even understood. Even if we were to say ban 100 TikTok apps, even if we were to stop Chinese investment from coming in, how do we know that as we open out to global players that the Chinese have not tied up with them? So there are a whole lot of questions. The US and China have taken 3 years and they are still nowhere near disengagement. So I think we need to take this, so prioritize. And I think the most important issue for India is to prioritize its development, its economic development, its regeneration, bring back employment, go back to double-digit growths, because only that growth is going to be the best response. If China is interested in keeping India down, India's response has to be to show that they can come back. In the short term, no escaping Chinese engagement, and therefore I feel that a balanced and a nuanced way in which we explore our options but continue to engage with the Chinese for our own interests is the best bet. And let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, another very helpful tour d'horizon of all of the complexities involved and how, yes, we're going to have to live with China. So how do we do it? I'm going to give just a quick heads up. We're a little tight on time, so I'll come back afterwards through the panel and with two questions. So one is, as Professor Acharya talked about, in terms of alliances and working with others, other people mentioned it also. The one country that hasn't been mentioned is Russia. So the one question will be, okay, how do we fit Russia into this equation going forward, India-China triangle, Russian equation going forward over the next 5 years? And then the second question will be, if you're prime minister for a day, what is the policy that you implement immediately? Okay, so the panelists will have a bit of time to think about that. And in the meantime, we get to go to Professor Kondapalli for another complex analysis, I'm sure, given this great work. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Cleo, and the organizers. Let me suggest that, let me try to simplify the argument. In the next 5 years, what is going to be the trajectory of India-China? I think we probably will have to, touch upon a lot of sensitive issues. The things, of course, are becoming much more uncertain with the COVID-19 spread. The economies are on free fall. Chinese have given some statistics, but Li Keqiang gave another statistics saying that the per capita income is far less than what they have said before. Previously, per capita income $9,000, and now it has come down to a few $1,000s. So we do not know whether the 3.2% growth rate is also real in China. So we have to wait and see. The COVID-19 is a major factor in the next 5 years' time for everybody, including for the Chinese and the Indians as well. The second flowing from that is investments. The Indian government suggested that despite the COVID-19, we have seen an upsurge in investments in India. We have both in greenfield investments as well as in infrastructure. China also has attracted investments. So the investment markets are to be watched closely. Still, these are two emerging markets. So there is still a lot of scope, steam for these markets. So investments, next 5 years, India and China are going to be the major destinations despite the COVID setback. So that's number one. Number three is technology flows. While there is a lot of uncertainty about the technology, especially with 5G, and also, of course, a lot of disruptive technologies have come in, cyber and so on and so forth. But technologies are the ones which are going to play also a bigger role in the next 5 years. China is making its own efforts, and India as well, with its various programs. So technology flows is one area where we probably will see substantial influence in the next 5 years. Geopolitics is going to play a bigger role, and I will come back into this later on. As the Galwan incident and Black Top, Helmet Top indicated, sovereignty issues are going to be substantially taking the attention of the leaderships. And related to that is nationalism. There is bubbling nationalism in China and also in India. This is a factor which is going to influence substantially. Nationalism, sovereignty factors are deadly for countries. They can go to war if this combination intensifies. China has been spreading out in all directions. South China Sea, Taiwan Straits, Senkaku Islands. They're calling Australians by names. Europeans, the Chinese ambassador to UK is going bonkers by speaking so many things on the 5G and other things. There is also the recent events related to Galwan and others. It appears the Global Times is waging war on India. Other than the Western Theatre Command and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, if you look at last 2 days editorials in the Global Times and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Western Theatre Command, you see a lot of coercive diplomatic statements. Just short of war, they are saying so many things, which is a new thing in the last several decades. So sovereignty and nationalism is going to be a deadly combination. Both China and India have enough resources of this. So we're going to see some music in this direction. Quickly, India and China have said in their joint statements they are simultaneously rising countries, which also means that they compete, they cooperate, they do a lot of other things for this rising status in terms of FDI, technology, and all that sort of thing. Both are into globalization selectively, of course. Both are in WTO, both have the technology game that they are playing. The Communist Party of China mentioned a 2049 roadmap in the 19th Party Congress. So they're not just looking at the next 5 years, they're looking at the next 3 decades. There is a program for the PLA, People's Liberation Army. There is a program for the Communist Party as well. So by 2021, next year, they are supposed to build a well-off society, which is roughly about $35,000, but they are nowhere near that target of a European standard on the well of society. So that could also lead to a lot of problems. They have, in May, they have announced the dual circulation strategy, both domestic consumption as well as the external dependence on the markets, etc. The socialist modernization by 2049 is the goal, and they wish to have the two centennials, the Communist Party establishment as well as the PRC establishment, 100 years of these. At the end of the tunnel, China wants to occupy the center stage, as the General Secretary of the Communist Party, Xi Jinping, mentioned in his walk report. Currently, the US is at the center stage. They want to occupy that center stage. So there is a lot of debate that will happen, whether a Sino-centric world order is better for India or a liberal order is better for India. There will be debates. By 2049, India will have to take sides on this. But I think with the Galwan incident and the black top, helmet top, we have been taking some decisions. Previously, we were taking a hedging strategy, but now with the Indian Navy participating in South China Sea, we are taking a very explicit position. Not a hedging strategy, but an explicit. This is not containment of China, but it is a different one. Dr. Jaishankar mentioned about equilibrium that exists between China and India. Manmohan Singh also mentioned about equilibrium in 2009. So if that is the Indian aspiration, we will probably see some fireworks, including in Ladakh and other areas. Belt and Road Initiative is their flagship program. Next 5 years or next 2040, 2050, we're going to see that as the poster boy for China. And so this is going to influence. India did not join the BRI, especially the CPEC projects. So this is going to be a heartburn for the Chinese, which is partly reflected in Galwan. Multipolarity, they mentioned in the Party Congress report, but I think with the Galwan, multipolarity may take a backseat, with India probably skipping the Moscow meetings this September, this month. So that is in terms of the Chinese connection in the next 5 years and beyond. India has its own roadmap. India mentioned about Vikas or development as their aspiration. Indian Prime Minister mentioned this. So let us see that that is the Indian agenda. And the BJP manifesto, which is the ruling party now, mentioned about $5 trillion economy. Although, of course, this quarter there is a decline in GDP, but this is a transition period for everyone. So let us assume that they will bounce back in the next quarter or others. So $5 trillion economy is the aspiration for India in the next 5 years' time. So will China contribute to this? China competes with this? China counters the $5 trillion? That is also a big question. Chinese, so far, their role in Indian development is only about $8 billion in investments. Out of a $14 trillion GDP, their investments are only about $8 billion, according to Ambassador Sun Weidong's comments. So their role has been marginal so far in terms of the $5 trillion making up for India. So let us see how it pans out on that. Prime Minister Modi mentioned about Atmanirbhar, which basically would mean self-help measures and so on. So if that is the agenda, we probably will see less Chinese exports and imports into India. And with the Skill India, Digital India, and other programs, we may probably see some competition here. And the axe may fall on Huawei 5G soon, as it fell on Chinese investments, as well as on the 59 plus 49 apps so far in the IT and other sectors. So Atmanirbhar would be a defining moment in the India-China economic and other relations. So we have so far seen hedging strategy, not joining the US camp, not joining the other camps, not even the Russian camp. You mentioned about Russia. There is a strategic partnership, but not necessarily very close to Russia, like the 1971 treaty. So, which means basically then India will have to reevaluate in the background of what happens in the next 2 to 3 weeks on the territorial dispute. We are heading for some kind of a skirmish on the border with the recent events, which suggests we could probably see radical changes in India-China relations in the next 5 years' time in terms of bilateral relations. At the Asian level, they will gobble up spaces in Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, East Asia, so on, or they will have tie-ups with these countries, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and so on and so forth. So this is going to be an active competitor. There is also going to be stress on global commons, maritime, space, and cyber domains. We're going to see a lot of stress between India and China in this. Beginning this year, flowing from what happens on the territorial dispute. If the Chinese go back to the status quo ante of April 2020, then we go back again to the informal summit meetings. If the Chinese still gobble up the Indian territory in Galwan, in other areas, then we probably will have an active competitive relationship because nationalisms will clash on this. And so I would foresee a kind of negative balance in the India-China relations.
Thank you. We're just for the sake of, sorry, Professor Gandapalli, just for the sake of time, if I could ask you, because now we'll go back through the panel quickly. If we're not going to have time for the Russia question, but if everybody wants to be prime minister for a moment, and we'll go back through the panel backwards. Given the situation that you're talking about, where first of all there's a you have to take an accurate look at China's numbers because sometimes what they say might not be accurate in terms of their economic development and the limited trade, all that sort of stuff. And again, we're going to go backwards, so we'll start with you, Professor Gandapalli. If you could implement one policy today to improve India's position over the next 5 years vis-a-vis China, what would it be? Sorry, you're muted. Sorry.
I think the policy already has begun, Atmanirbhar policy of attracting investments, etc. This is going to be a hard burn between China and India because the Global Times again mentioned about shift in the industries from China to Vietnam, Indonesia, and India because of the labor charges increasing in China and also because of the COVID-19 disaster. We are likely to see some shift. The Japanese are subsidizing some companies to shift over. Americans have announced 220 companies shifting. The Foxconn has already opened up shops in Chennai, Pune, and other places with $10 billion investment. So one policy that is immediately visible and very starkly you will see in Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan and other areas where you have the states have much more autonomy. So it is going to be a major driver.
Perfect, thank you. Professor Acharya, Prime Minister for the day, what would you like to implement immediately? Oh, sorry, you're muted.
So hypothetical, because clearly I would pass up the opportunity to be prime minister. But I would look at initiating a real blitzkrieg, if you will, on the India's immediate neighborhood. I think in a situation where the India-China relations are getting tense and there are these war clouds which everybody seems to sense gathering, you want your neighbors to be with you. So a very, very strong push to immediately neutralizing your neighborhood and going further towards Southeast Asia. So you're basically trying to ensure that this is not going to be a scenario where you will be on the side with lesser people around you, and China is maybe able to pressurize these countries into taking positions against India. So I think not just in this current context, which is obviously the immediate springboard, but in general, I think the push to the neighborhood, very proactive push, the push of a big power vis-a-vis the neighbors, and substantial, of course, excepting Pakistan, I mean, that's a different category, improve your neighborhood, bring it back to a situation where they actually look at India and not China as the first stop. So not competitively, because we can't compete with the Chinese in terms, but bringing the political back into our relations with the neighbors, a positive political dynamic.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ambassador Goel?
Thank you very much. If I were the Prime Minister, I wouldn't have explained why I would have a policy. I would just have a policy, and therefore I will state the policy really. And it will not be China limited, simply because we cannot deal with China in isolation. We have to do it at a global level. So my policy would be build up global supply chains, number one, and number two, focus on developing technology within the country in collaboration, but technology will be the prime driver. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Verma?
Okay, I'll go along with what Suresh was saying. Not for Prime Minister, but I would love to be an advisor. So don't take the blame for anything that you do. Anyway, to put it succinctly, what I would do, I think in the political area, I think there is no running away from Atmanirbhar, and Atmanirbharta in the true sense of the word, in the real sense of the word. We've been there earlier, but I don't think we were serious enough to carry it through. I think the time has come when we really need to do these things, possibly, and make the ease of business. I think a lot of work has been done in the last 6 years for the government to be able to take off in a very realistic way in this. Along with this, I think we have to dovetail into a policy of multi-alignments. We have to shed this non-alignment. We have to shed this business strategic autonomy and go into strategic alignment with people who can help us. And you can name countries in this, whether it's Japan, whether it's Australia, whether it's Taiwan, whether it's the US. We need the technologies. We need to actually do quantum jumps in technologies, and this is where you have to go to get that kind of thing. And then I don't think there's any problem in being able to catch up with the modern world. I think China is still a long distance away, and we're not into competition with them in terms of economy or whatever. But certainly, we must realize the potential that India has, and the reservoir of skill, of manpower, of skilled manpower, and the youth energy that we have. I think there's a lot of pluses going for us, and I think we need to capitalize. On the military side, I would look at some pain points for the Chinese. I don't think they understand anything other than pain for themselves. And we need to do that. Now, this cannot again come again or on our own. I guess we can hold them back in Ladakh, perhaps, and maybe in some other fronts. But I think we need to open up new fronts. We need to be able to tell them that these can cost you a lot of pain. And that loss of pain need not be kinetic in many ways. It can be a non-kinetic kind of thing. I mean, what about developing an IOR strategy and choking a couple of maybe Malacca for 3 days? I think that can set China back a couple of $100 billion. They will understand what it means. This has to come in concept. So we need to build up these multi-alignments. We need to work in concert with other countries. We need to be very clear about that China remains a threat unless your border dispute is sorted out. And that border dispute does not mean only what stands between India and China as they face each other, but POK and Gilgit-Baltistan, where they're making inroads. And we need to watch out that time too. The entire Sino-Indian border, as it stood, say in 1914 or something, that should be resolved. for us to be able to then do serious business with China. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lieutenant General Dua?
I'm going to disappoint you all. I'm going to pass up this question of the Prime Minister, not only because Mr. Verma is I would be repeating most of what Mr. Verma has said, both the points about military and about openly linking or making decisions in terms of your strategic linkages. So I'm going to take that question of yours on Russia because it is important. And let me just begin by saying that if I may quote Professor Shrikant, he spoke about finding equilibrium. We will, in a different context, we have to find equilibrium with Russia. Russia is a very important, in our context. Also, I want to point out as a military man, there is no escape from our engagement with Russia. We have about 60%, if not more, even now. I could be wrong by a few, numbers here and there, but approximately 60% or thereabouts is our equipment, military equipment, weapons and platforms are from the Russian stables, so to say. We are acquiring the S-400, which is an ongoing process, which is going to be an important thing. In military platforms, it's a life cycle chain that we have. If our equipment is going to be in service for 20 years, they are contract bound to give us spares, even if we have some glitches. So all I'm trying to say, when we are talking of 5 years, 10 years, it's too less a time. We have to remain with in the military terms with our equipment, etc., with the Russian side. So we have to stay. Obviously, then we have to stay engaged. And in any case, to find equilibrium in this era of multilateral engagements, it also makes sense. I know Russia and China are closely aligned, but then we have our linkages. Like Professor Srinath, I think it was he who said, it may not be like 71, but then there is no going away from that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I just jump in for 30 seconds and develop the point which Dua was saying?
Yep.
I wish I'd answered that too. I think with Russia and China, it's a relationship of expediency. It's because the Russians have been shunned by a lot of the West. It's got no other choice but to go where it is. But when we are looking at this strategic alignments that we are looking around, perhaps we can get back into winning back Russia into the fold and actually play on the differences between the Russians and the Chinese. What the Chinese are doing to the Russians, whether it is in Vladivostok, whether it is in Siberia, whether it is in the Central Asian republics, the Russians are not fools. They understand. They've also run an empire. They know what the limits of their relationship. So I think there's a requirement of a realignment of thought and thinking, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Japan, whether it's in the Quad, whether it's in NATO, to see how we can get back Russia into the fold of the larger committee of nations, and then try and see how the Chinese react to it, and perhaps sort of curb their ambition and appetite of being overtly aggressive and assertive. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an optimistic and admirable. So unfortunately, we've run out of time for the first sessions, but I'm sure we're going to be addressing a lot of these issues in the second session. So I'd just like to thank this incredible panel for enlightening us and for being, if not Prime Minister, then part of the cabinet for about an hour. And I'll hand it back to GCTC Central Command. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you to all the speakers for this enriching session. I'm sure the audience had a lot to learn. So now we will be starting our second session on the geo-economic affairs. So we are our speakers. So we have Lieutenant General KJ Singh, who is one second, I'm just having a problem. Lieutenant General Kamaljeet Singh and Lieutenant General Kamaljeet Singh, PVSM, AVSM, Bar R, Is a retired Indian Army officer and former General Officer Commanding-in-Chief of Western Command. After retirement, he was conferred with the Maharaja Ranjit Singh Chair of Excellence in Punjab University and was appointed as advisor to the Chief Minister of Haryana in November of 2018. Lieutenant General Singh is currently the State Information Commissioner and for the government of Haryana. He is also on the Executive Council Board of the Global Counter-Terrorism Council. So next we have Professor Madhav Das Nalapat, who holds the UNESCO Chair for Peace and Director of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations at Manipal University. Currently, he is the Editorial Director of ITV Network and the Sunday Guardian. Vice Chairman of Manipal Advanced Research Group, he has been the coordinating editor of the Times of India and the editor of Mathrubhumi. Professor Nalapat is also on the Executive Council Board of Global Counterterrorism Council. Next, we have Professor Swaran Singh, who is the chair and professor for the Diplomacy and Disarmament at Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, School of International Studies, JNU, which is Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. Professor Singh has over 25 years of experience in research and teaching, and he lectures at major institutions like National Defense College, the Defense Services Staff College, and all other major military institutions, as also foreign service, such as the Foreign Service Institute, the Indian Institute for Public Administration. He also contributes to radio and television discussions. JNU has already awarded 18 PhDs and 37 MPhils under his supervision. So next, we have Mr. Rajat Katuria, who is the Director and Chief Executive at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, New Delhi. He has over 20 years of experience in teaching and 15 years experience in economic policy. Besides research interests on a range of issues relating to regulation and competition policy, he has worked with the World Bank in Washington, D.C. as a consultant and carried out research assignments for a number of international organizations, including the International Labour Organization, UNCTAD, Line Asia, World Bank, and ADB, which is the Asian Development Bank. He has published in international and national journals as well, besides in popular magazines and newspapers. Then we have Dr. Rityusha Mani Tiwari, who is a visiting fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi. Teaches in the Department of Political Science, Shahid Bhagat Singh College, University of Delhi. She holds a PhD in Chinese Studies from JNU, Delhi. The current focus of her research includes unpacking the interplay of power and hegemony in East Asia and China's role in shaping regionalism therein. She was the recipient of the Visiting Program for Young Sinologists in 2017, awarded by the Ministry of Culture. So, now I would like to call upon again Cleo ma'am, who will be a moderator for this session as well. So over to you, Cleo ma'am.
Hi, thank you. Good to be back. It's been a long time. I'm going to probably follow the same thing we did last time. So if everybody could speak for about 5 to 6 minutes about where you'd like to be and to refine it a little bit more. If you want to talk about policy things you'd like to see implemented immediately, that would be helpful to kind of frame the discussion. So we know we've established from the first session that China's not going to give up, that some of the key weaknesses on the Chinese side are economic, but it's also one of its strengths. Same thing with technology. And that the border is a symptom of the problem and not a cause of the problem. So how can India get to where it wants to be in 5 years from now? So Lieutenant General Singh, if you'd like to lead off the attack, thank you.
Jai Hind, Leo. Let me start by paying my respects and reverence to General Malhotra. In fact, the last hour that he spent in strategic studies was in trying to mentor me. We were in the same discussion. He was to speak in the afternoon and he was preparing himself for that. And I distinctly remember we going for tea and he told me that you will like the coffee much better over here in India International Center. So, but the kind of mentoring he did, I just can't forget. So my reverence, respect to that great soldier, and I agreed to do this session also because of that. And I put a condition on Aditya, who's normally not very amenable to arm twisting, but I tried the Chinese trick, and I managed to convince him that instead of economic dimension, make it geo-economic. So we are talking about geo-economics. So China has managed to leverage the geo-economics in a remarkable manner. You have to give the devil its due. You just can't wish it away. Because here is a country which wants to convert this century into Chinese century. And to have a century of its own, there are certain criteria. You know, academically, people say that you need to have economic heft, you need to have the military muscle, and you need to have certain amount of co-option, certain amount of attractiveness. Now, America has had huge big attractiveness. America is so attractive that by last count, 70% of children of CCP, Chinese Communist Party, go to America to study. Even Xi Jinping's daughter is there. So, co-option wise, nobody can match America. It has military muscle also, and it has economic power. Now, China wants to displace America. But you know, the people who know this subject well, they say, it's not only enough to have all this, you also need a sense of responsibility and trying to take charge of things. Now, this is where China has rolled out a very unique combination. Like somebody says, America has lost the wars it fought in Iraq, in Vietnam, in Lebanon, and Afghanistan, probably, where this is stalemate is a loss for a power like America. But on the contrary, China has gained due to wars that it hasn't fought. It has never taken responsibility. It has never got into Afghanistan. Yet it wants a stake in the iron copper mines of Afghanistan. It is waiting for situation to resolve and economically move it. So here is a grand example of a country that takes no responsibility, none at all, rolls out projects which are on bilateral mode, that we will not have multilateral. The BRI is a shining example of that. And none of them are driven by the desires of that country's public. It's not a win-win thing. So you're not building any capability also. Today you take a reality check, you will realize that 17 countries in Africa are ready to get colonized by China. Angola leads the pack, Kenya is the next, and you can keep naming those countries. Recently, when Maldives also was put under some pressure by after change of regime, they said finally that we cannot decouple from China so easily. Even in the CPEC, which is my favorite subject of study, the indicators that I get is that China is hell-bent on putting it back on track. And Chabahar is no match to CPEC, not even a iota, I would say that. So now challenge for us, we want to decouple, we want to become Atmanirbhar. Is that possible? Geo-economically, our neighbors are ambivalent. They are not with us completely. They are just with us in parts. So Nepal is not really with us. Bhutan, by some method, is with us. Myanmar is having second thoughts. No, Myanmar is still because of the arms and all being caught there. But Bangladesh is having second thoughts. China, and what China has also done, we all know, they put money in the constituency of the leader. So Mahinda Rajapaksa's constituency is Hambantota and Matala Airport to sink money. So Nawaz Sharif, and you do that, you realign the CPEC, But after these rulers depart, there are inquiries and problems. But let me come back to my main theme. Can we go the path of Atmanirbhar? It's a very difficult challenge. It is today China has started its own Atmanirbhar. If you have been reading newspapers, China is embarking on a policy called as dual circulation system. That is boost up the internal market and combine it with exports. So China is trying an Atmanirbhar of its own, and it's justifying it on various grounds. I will, before I just conclude, I would like to very quickly put 2-3 pointers. Atmanirbharta is not so easy. It has to be well thought out. There has to be a strategy. It's not a switch which can be put on and off. There has to be a strategic decoupling. We have to prioritize. We have to choose the niche areas. Like PM is trying to do toys, like the APIs in pharmaceuticals. Like otherwise, we will go horribly wrong. So while we are all ready to make sacrifice, but it has to be well thought out. It cannot happen overnight. It will be stretched out over a period of time. I think here I'll pause, and here other wise people like I can see Professor Nalpat after he speaks, or Swaran Singh, then what is there left for us? So thank you. You gave me a chance to hit 2 or 3, sixes. Thank you. We go
Thank you very much,
maybe
General. And you started us off very well with the emphasis on the geoeconomic component of getting that in order before we can figure out how to do the strategy over the next 5 years. Professor Nalapat, what we're doing is we're looking at how India can get to where it wants to be in 5 years, and the theme here is geoeconomics. So take it away.
Well, I'd like to say that, each time I come to a session like this and I interact with the folks who are or were in the military, I feel what a lot India has lost over the last 70 years in not involving our military integrally in defense policy. Whether you go to Japan, whether you go to Germany, whether you go to the UK, whether you go to the US, I'm sorry, clear, I'm not very sure about Canada. I think Canada is almost as pacifist as India, if not more. But I'm only saying that it is, in a sense, this lack of involvement of the military in the defense ministry as a very integral part of the ministry is something which is there in India, which is not there in many other democracies. And the sooner this is changed, the better. It's not just a question of a chief of defense staff. The point is the military is the cutting edge of our security, and it's and from that point of view, it's got to be at the cutting edge of framing of policy also. So I simply want to say that each time I come for these meetings, I listen to what the military folks are saying. I always believe that yes, we have some brilliant people in the civilian establishment, absolutely brilliant, whether they're IAS, whether they're IPS, IRS, I mean, you name it, Indian Foreign Service, brilliant people. But then, in the Indian military also, IMS, the Indian Military Service, you also have brilliant people. So I do wish that we would have the IMS as part of this thing. Well, having said that, I want to say very clearly that, look, I have said a lot, written a lot, and I really don't propose to believe that nobody here has access to the internet. And I'm not going to bore you, because I would like more to listen to speeches than to basically talk. I simply want to say that, look, opportunities come once in a while. And when opportunities come, they have to be completely taken advantage of. If you look at if you look at any kind of onward progression of a country, it's entirely based on the fact that opportunities that came were discovered and were seized upon and not ignored. So that is the kind of situation we are facing today, really a point of inflection in the geopolitical order. And that point of inflection is the shift from an Atlanticist world to an Indo-Pacific world. Now, I know this is actually not at all, if I may say so, this is not at all new to the people here. I am essentially saying what all of you know. I am repeating the obvious, but sometimes, unfortunately, the obvious is not apparent in policy. So allow me to once again repeat the obvious. The reality is that today, with the growth of Asia and Asian countries, that includes Japan, South Korea, China, India, Indonesia, the Middle East, until some recent developments in oil prices. In all these countries, the Indo-Pacific has today become the center of gravity in the global world order. That used to be held by the Atlantic, by the two shores of the Atlantic, and now it's been transformed to the Indo-Pacific. Again, let me state the obvious. This is not something that the Europeans will be very happy with unless they somehow become adopted into the Indo-Pacific family. Now, you've seen, for example, France is now under Macron, is now looking at trying to be adopted as honorary Lebanese. And Mr. Macron is all over Lebanon. Now, the reality is that he'll have to send 600,000 French troops there if he wants to make any difference to the politics of Lebanon. I'm not very sure that the voters who voted him would vote him a second time if even a tenth of that number was sent to Lebanon. But I only want to say that, look, the time has long passed for a security system that involves the Indo-Pacific and the Indo-Pacific countries. Now here, the countries who are outside the Indo-Pacific, whether it is in Europe, for example, whether it is Russia, obviously there will be some interaction between this. But the reality is that essentially it is security. And security against what? Security against the domination of the Indo-Pacific by any single power. Because what happens when you have domination, if you talk in terms of economics, you talk in terms of monopoly. What happens when a monopoly is created? And you've seen the Indian telecom sector, for example, because of the fact that the laws are such that a large number of companies were eliminated. And today, frankly, the kind of auctioning is such that almost all the few surviving companies, most of them are in the ICU, not even in the critical ward, but in the ICU. And as you know, in the ICU, it's a question of day-to-day survival and existence. I would like to only make the point that in this situation, the Indo-Pacific countries, the United States, yes, Canada, then India, Australia, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Oman, now Saudi Arabia, which is now into the post-Wahhabi phase under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. These countries have got to be integrated into an alliance that is there to secure themselves against domination by any single country. Now, we can. There are a large number of people in the National Capital Region who talk of the way the United States has been dominating. So many parts of the world. Anybody who has been to Washington will find it very hard to find a dominant voice in Washington. It's long been said that policy in Washington is like food in a bazaar. You walk to some place, you get aloo chaat. You go to another place, you get Italian food, you get Spanish food. And finally, the mix that comes is completely indecipherable, for all of us. Even the Americans are surprised sometimes at what passes off for policy in the United States. The point is, that kind of a country, a democracy can never really dominate. A genuine democracy. I'm not talking of of Britain in the time of Churchill, when yes, you had a small ruling class, you had a racially charged kind of definition. For example, Churchill's Anglosphere did not include India. But today, if you're talking about the Anglosphere and you don't include the second largest English-speaking country in the world, which is India, we have almost as many English language speaking people in India as we have in the United States. Britain is very far behind. So the British will have to worry about not being part of the 21st century Anglosphere, but India is very much a part of that. In that situation, I'd like to say this Indo-Pacific construct, and we have been talking about an Indo-Pacific charter, rather than have talk in terms of NATO, for example, or an Asian version of NATO. And that's an idea that was floated more than 20 years ago, and that's been hanging in the air ever since. I think it's been causing nightmares to people in China. It's been causing upset moods to people in Russia and some other places. But an Indo-Pacific charter is a very anodyne framework for basically ensuring a mutual defense and security system. What was the advantage of NATO? The Soviet Union, let it be very clear, at any time it had the conventional strength to go right up to the Channel coast of France. Maybe it wouldn't go to France. Maybe it would stop at Belgium. Hitler didn't do that, but maybe Moscow would have done that. But what stopped the Soviet Union? NATO, and the promise of NATO that if one country is attacked, every country will join hands together. You saw what happened in 9/11. You had a whole lot of air forces come there. I don't think they did any good at all because the terrorists were taken care of elsewhere in the world. But at least it was a signal that NATO was serious about one for all and all for one. We need that kind of a construct in the Indo-Pacific, which is why I'd like to say, if you'd like to include China and Russia into it, well then, it's like including Pakistan and SAARC. I have never been in favor of including Pakistan and SAARC because the whole purpose of Pakistan is to sabotage whatever SAARC does. But we have been tolerating Pakistan because the point about India, I think it's ingrained in the Indian psyche that sacrifice is a great thing. The more we sacrifice, the better we are, and the greater the rewards that await us in the afterlife. Well, that could well be true, but I think none of us will be around to testify how true it is. But in the meantime, we are enduring the results of that sacrifice in this particular life. So I'd only like to say that this alliance has to be very clear. It has got to avoid domination by any single country. And guess which country is trying to dominate and have primacy, including over the Indo-Pacific? No, actually, it's certainly not Britain. I mean, the British are a very far cry from what they were. And the presence of, for example, Priti Patel and the presence of the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the presence of various others, I think makes it very clear about that. It's a country which I shall not name because I like that country. I go there often. And I would like to say that I have a very high respect for the leadership of that country. They are very smart people. They are very focused people. In fact, one of the, at 7 o'clock in the evening, I was doing an interview with a channel called CGTN, China Global Television Network, on this particular India-China standoff. And I mean, in a very polite way, because we are in Asia, we like to be polite. I was telling them exactly what the Indian perspective is, which is that if you believe that you are right 100% of the time, and that we are wrong 100% of the time, I'm sorry, that's not a great basis for dialogue. I think that kind of a dialogue is not there. And we certainly believe we are the equal of China. We certainly believe we have the same length of history and culture. We certainly believe we have the same superpower future. So please learn to treat us equally, and then maybe we'll find an equilibrium. But till that happens, don't hold your breath about that. Now, all that was said by me and CGTN. They've normally been very good about carrying whatever I say. Hopefully, this time also, they'll carry whatever I say. Look, I'm not going to name the country that is, in my view, seeking to establish dominance of the logistics supply routes, dominance over the logistics chains, dominance over the financial system through a reset of the US dollar and through by itself buying up large amounts of gold, going into digital currency, going into blockchain for transparency. I'm not naming the country which is now sucking up metadata including from India, through various apps. Regrettably, Prime Minister Modi seems to have, understood that, and he has been banning Chinese apps with abandon. And I saw today that even more apps have been banned. Now, well, India has banned about 200 times more apps than the great anti-China president of the United States, Donald Trump. So I would like to check exactly how anti-China an individual is who is still not banned TikTok and who's ready to have ByteDance get $10-20 billion from selling TikTok to some American guy. I mean, personally, I would like, TikTok value would have fallen to $20. Maybe all of us in this room put together, maybe we could have bid for TikTok if Donald Trump had the nerve, frankly, to really ban TikTok instead of just talking about it. So, frankly, I don't see what Prime Minister Modi has done. I don't think any other person has done. But I would like to say again very clearly, we have this opportunity, the opportunity of setting up an Indo-Pacific security cordon, an opportunity of ensuring security to democracy. And in that, Taiwan needs to play a central role. It's not accidental that whenever I go to Beijing, almost always, I make it a point to stop over in Taipei for 2 or 3 days and then go to Beijing. It's a little similar to the way, American presidents or rather, American diplomats, very lowly, or even American tourists used to come via Islamabad and Rawalpindi and Lahore to India. I don't think we liked it very much. I don't think my Chinese hosts like it very much that I always fly in from Taipei, but I like it. And I'm a citizen of a democracy. Why Taiwan is important is Taiwan, Japan, and the United States are the 3 countries that made China an economic superpower. All 3 countries are looking to decouple from China and Chinese supply chains. In China today, if you're Taiwanese and you believe you're Taiwanese, I think you're a short while from going to jail. And I think in the next 2 or 3 years in Taiwan, if you become an agent of the PRC, I think then that particular Taiwanese is also likely to go to jail. The same thing is going to happen in Japan. I foresee the same thing happening in India. The same thing is happening already in Australia. In fact, I am pleasantly surprised that Australians have done much more and said much less than the Americans. The Americans have said a lot, but done very little. They're not even, for heaven's sake, ensuring that India is assured a very strong supply of logistics to ensure that the crests of the Himalayas are taken over by the finest armed forces in the world. And again, I'm not going to name those armed forces, but may I say the First World War and the Second World War would not have been won but for those armed forces. So look, we have this opportunity of security. We have this opportunity also of investment and growth. Taiwan, for example, when it removes its supply chains from China, India is an obvious choice. Yes. Japan, United States, India. I know that I'm sure Lockheed and all the other big companies would like to set up units in India for simple reason they can't compete with the Sino-Russian alliance if they produce entirely in the United States, no matter what Donald Trump wants them to do. So I just want to end by saying, Deng Xiaoping grabbed that opportunity in 1979. He realized that, frankly, the Chinese needed to completely have a different copybook. From the 1980s, he began implementing that copybook, and superpower China is the result of that copybook. Today, Prime Minister Modi has a similar opportunity. In the Cold War 2.0 presents Prime Minister Modi an opportunity similar to what was presented to Deng Xiaoping by Cold War 1.0 between the US and the USSR. If that opportunity is seized, I can tell you, we are on the way to superpower status, we are on the way to prosperity, and more importantly, security, because let me end by saying the Chinese are very rational people. Way back in 2001, I remember when a particular US ambassador, who subsequently was rewarded by India with $1 million a year, I don't know why, completely panicked the entire global community by pulling out every American citizen from India, saying, oh my God, there's going to be a nuclear war between India and Pakistan anytime. I wrote in the Washington Times, this war is never going to happen except in the imagination of some people. Let me tell you, if you have a security system anchored in the Indo-Pacific, I doubt that China is going to be half as active as it is now. And I doubt that the PLA is going to play the role in policy it is playing now. Having said that, allow me to say I'm grateful to be present in this group, and I'm sorry for being a little late with the other things, but I only want to say thank you so much for listening to me all this while.
Thank you very much, Professor Malapat. So in 5 years from now, hopefully we'll be celebrating the 4th anniversary of the Indo-Pacific Charter, which Taiwan is a member. Professor Singh, so again, we have theoretically about 6 minutes per speaker. So if you'd like to go ahead and lead us off, it'd be very appreciated. So 5 years from now, where would you like us to be, and how are we going to get there? You're muted. We can't hear you, unfortunately, Professor Singh.
So we are not able to hear you. Can you please rejoin in? Please, sir.
Okay, so shall we jump ahead to Mr. Kathuria while we're waiting for Mr. Singh to rejoin?
Well,
are you ready?
With some other speaker, next speaker.
Yeah. Mr. Kathuria? Sorry to jump in on you unexpected, but if you're ready to go, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we.
Yes. Thank you, Theo, and thank you, Aditya, for having me on the show. I've heard a number of arguments, so I'm going to approach this from sort of really an economic perspective, where we're going to be in 5 years from now. Unfortunately, COVID has sort of thrown a spanner into the works of where we want to be in 5 years. We want it to be a $5 trillion economy in 5 years in India, and I think that's going to be pushed back by a few years. We want it to be $1 trillion digital economy, and I'm afraid that's also going to be pushed back by a few years as well. So I think so we will get to a $5 trillion economy. We will get to $1 trillion digital economy, but I think it will be much later than we had anticipated. Not only for COVID, and that's why China is important here. I think it's also due to the sort of discontent that has become even deeper with globalization. And I think that's the lens I want to sort of approach my initial 5 minutes with, is that the way China used globalization, and I think a number of speakers before me have already mentioned it, I think they leveraged globalization very well. And one of the reasons why they were able to leverage globalization, notwithstanding what Mr. Trump has been saying about the unfairness by which they sort of participated in the multilateral system, they were able to attract huge amounts of foreign direct investment. They were able to create value chains within China, and therefore they were able to create sort of an export-led economy and become very, very competitive. So I think there's been no country, even before China, if you look at Japan, if you look at Korea, even the United States before that, that has been able to leverage globalization in the manner that China has been able to do that. And China actually said that we are willing, if you take the example of TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that China sort of pulled, wasn't even invited to, they told America and back channels that, whatever you want us to do, we will do, but please get us in. They wanted to be in the system. They wanted to be participants in TPP. Unfortunately, the way TPP worked out was that it sort of went ahead without the major country that had actually promulgated that. But be that as it may, I think it signaled China's intent to use globalization to the maximum possible advantage, and I think they will still do that. Unfortunately, in India, if you then draw a comparison with India, I think the external forces that confront India are much more adverse. Hyper-globalization is perhaps over, or globalization in the way that it happened when China was developing or growing is perhaps never going to happen again. I mean, but it's too early to write the epitaph of globalization. And I think India should benefit from globalization. It has to. We cannot become, and that's the major point that I wish to make, we cannot become a $5 trillion economy without participating in the global system. And I think the only way we can participate in the global system is putting our money where our mouth is, in the sense also being an actively engaged and sending the right signals that we are open for business, we are not protectionist. And I think here is where I come to Atmanirbhar, self-sufficiency. I think there is, at one level, you have to see Atmanirbharta as a political sort of slogan, and one as an economic sort of necessity. And I think as a political slogan, it will work out, but as an economic necessity, Atmanirbharta is very different. Self-sufficient. I mean, those of us who have grown up in India in the 70s and 80s, where producers were able to sell high-priced products to captive audience and very low-quality products. I mean, that's not the Atmanirbharta or self-sufficiency that we are talking about today. It's an Atmanirbharta or self-sufficiency which engages actively in globalization. And here's the second point. While we actively engage in globalization, we have to disengage from our largest or one of our largest trading partners. We've got entrenched value chains with China, not only directly with China, but we've got them through other countries as well. I mean, there are lots of rules of origin that are not complied with, and a lot of products come into India that could be of Chinese origin. So there is that rules of origin issue, and then of course actively we are trading with China, and our backward linkages with China are immense. So one fine day you can probably tell a consumer boycott Chinese products, and we've seen boycotts that haven't worked out in the United States. When there was a call for boycotting Mexican tuna, it didn't work out in the United States because consumers vote with their wallet. So it's going to be difficult to sort of boycott Chinese products. Okay, banning them or increasing the tariffs would be a way to sort of disengage from the Chinese, but then it would harm the domestic economy. And I think the Lieutenant General did say this, and even Professor Nalapad has said this before me, that we have to engage. Now, if we have to disengage, we have to find alternatives. Either we find domestic alternatives, which is we domesticate value chains, or find alternatives in other countries that we are comfortably to do business, that we are comfortable to do business, and they're going to involve a lot of transaction costs. It's not going to happen overnight. It could even take a long time, and it's not going to be easy, as I said, to get consumers and producers to wean them away from patterns of consumption that they have begun to internalize and that have already become entrenched. Producers today use Chinese inputs to export. And electronic industry is an example of that. IKEA is another example. They're sourcing a lot of furniture from China, which has recently been banned. So, disengaging from China will take costs, and we have to do it in a hard-hearted way. And that's the point that I made right in the beginning. China was hard-nosed about globalization. They said, as economists often say, that the best foreign policy is to have a good economic power. I mean, if you are an economic power, then you can have a foreign policy that suits your interests. But if you're not an economic power, and when China was not an economic power, they were willing to give in to all the demands that globalization made of them. And I think, and that's a lesson. We don't have to do it the way China did it, but we have to do it in a calibrated way, and we have to do it in a clever and intelligent way. We can't cut our nose to spite our face. That, I think, will shoot ourselves in the foot. So I think this is an opportunity to disengage, certainly, and there are triggers to disengagement, but we have to do it in a smart way. And the last point, Cleo, if you give me the opportunity, I'd like to make it, trade has become very political, globalization is very political. There was a time, when the European project was taking off, trade was very political. They said, let's engage more within the European Union, create this European Union that will then become an instrument of peace. So often trade is thought about as an instrument of peace. Of course, if one says that today with China, we engage more with China, create more dependencies, that will bring peace at the border. I mean, people will say you're naive, and that's a very flaky argument to make. But in a larger sense, trade has often been used as an instrument. We've tried it in SARC itself, trying to engage more with Pakistan, as one of the commentators said. I mean, Pakistan has been very difficult to deal with. We've tried the trade route. We've tried to build confidence with Pakistan, trying to use trade, and it seems to be working for a while, and then you have an incident and everything gets derailed. So I'm not for a moment suggesting that we sort of increase our dependencies or create more synergies with China. But what I'm saying is trade in a larger sense could be used, not as an instrument, but it could be used simultaneously with political, peace-building measures, and then trade can grow simultaneously. But abandoning trade, in one fell swoop, is going to harm us more than it harms China or harms other countries that are now at $10,000 per capita income. We're still at $2,000 per capita income. So I think we need globalization much more than any country before us needs it now. We are going to take off, and therefore globalization is both in our domestic interest and I think our geopolitical interest. I'll stop here, Theo. Happy to come back if there are questions. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. That it raises a lot of issues. How do you decouple without hurting yourself? And when I come back through the panel for the questions at the end, we'll do what we did last time, which is if you're a prime minister for a day, what's the first policy you're going to implement to make that happen? So that'll be coming at you. And now we've got Professor Singh is back, and hopefully we can hear him.
Thank you, Professor Pascal. I hope you can hear me this time.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. My salutes also to General Raj Malhotra, in whose birth anniversary we have this China-India relay race of scholars for last 2.5 hours. Let me begin by saying that I'll try to restrict myself to geoeconomics and look at current trends and 5 years from now, as was the title of this session. To help us, Chinese themselves have already a plan of this nature. In 2015, Premier Li Keqiang had presented a 10-year plan for Make in China 2025. And that was to run through 12th five-year plan and currently running through 13th five-year plan. And fundamentally what they wanted to do in this was to shift their economy from being a low-value, labor-intensive manufacturing sector to move to high technology, capital-intensive, research and development focused, especially sectors like aerospace, semiconductors, biotechnology. And that is where I think in many ways it looks like that COVID-19, as several panelists, I heard Ambassador Goyal saying earlier, have seen China at least themselves claiming to have a leapfrog during the COVID-19. And I think that is the chart that maybe many of you are looking at. Business Today, the Indian magazine has given this chart, which is making certain ripples here, as to how when the G7 economies are really sinking deep, including India, Chinese are growing at 3.2%, and we are also, of course, seeing a similar trend in G20 economies. So before we move into these speculations or prognosis of what is happening month-to-month basis focused by COVID-19, let's see current trends as the focus of this session is as to what was happening before we entered COVID-19. Between China and India, China was destination for India's 5% of exports, but 14% of imports. So China is the largest source of India's imports. Again, if you can see this chart pie, some of you will see that China remains the largest single source of India's imports even now, despite the fact that last year and most likely this year, the trade is going to enormously shrink. My estimate is this year trade will shrink by $10 billion or plus. So in that sense, this trade deficit problem will continue. The problem of colonial trade, in that sense, we send all the primary products and they send value-added commercial commodities to us, will continue. Investments will also slow down over a period of time, but China already has enormous presence here. So 118 apps being banned is interesting. It's a symbolism. But all of India's e-commerce is still largely funded by the Chinese. So you can look at 800 companies that, for example, have their bases in India now. 75 of them have production lines in India. They are really dominating in supply, in optical fiber, in construction equipment, in renewable energy, solar cells, 50% of solar cells, all kind of consumer appliances. So this e-commerce is going to continuously still be Chinese dominated in Indian case for next 5 years, irrespective of the problems continuing. It will shrink, but this will still be a major contributor. For example, 18 of the 13 unicorn startups of India are Chinese funded. In last 5 years, $4 billion of investments China has had. 60 64 to 67% of telephony in India. For example, all major mobile phones, Xiaomi, Vivo, Oppo together mean 72% of Indian market, leaving Apple and Samsung far behind. So in that sense, yes, we are doing certain amount of symbolism of banning apps, tightening regulations, but that's not going to really make China disappear as a major influence. And another major area in middle of pandemic, which is making enormous amount of ripples, is India's medicines, generic medicines particularly, where India is the third largest producer, 14th largest in terms of value production. Hydroxychloroquine or Pentacid are being talked, but another pie chart if you want to see how China is the primary supplier of APIs which make India's generic medicines possible. So with that kind of deeply entrenched China in Indian economy, what is going to happen in 5 years? Most estimates are now talking that COVID-19, as several of your panel said, will give a leapfrog to China. So China is going to be really growing stronger in terms of economy, is largely how it is estimated in terms of comparative relationship of economic growth rates. But let me underline that the main aim of China's economy, which is the core of China's strength, has been during Xi Jinping particularly period to transform and convert that economic prowess into political influence. Now, COVID-19 has resulted in the hardest hit on the political capital of China. Much of the world is really angry, whatever the reasons may be, partly they are all failures, but they are all together in being angry with China. And I think next 5 years we'll see China repairing that political cost, where it is trying to convert that economic prowess into political influence. We'll see China repeatedly still repairing that loss of political capital over a period of time. And I think that is going to be the main focus. But in brass tack terms, in terms of economic progression, China is already shifting its low value, capital intensive production to other countries. And India may be recipient of some of these voluntarily, because we are also talking of several companies, both high tech and low value production companies are moving out of China. Some of them Chinese themselves have been talking about that they want them to move out. So some of them will come to India perhaps, but as we talk, Chinese are already moving now from worldwide web-based, information sharing-based economy to now blockchain economy, where assets are going to be exchanged between countries. And they are, as I think Professor Nalapat did make mention of a country that he didn't want to name, is doing all kinds of experiments of digital yuan, of e-payment platforms, of all kind of blockchain, artificial intelligence, big data. That is where China's focus is going to be. So they are again seeking to compete with United States, is where they are going to push economy in that direction. The conversion of that economic power into political influence will be halted for a certain period of time. How will India react and engage China during that period? In next 5 years, India definitely will be the largest population single country in Asia. Particularly when you look at that as an asset in terms of the median age of our population being only 27, I think that will become a major asset for India in terms of then providing low value, low production, cheap commodities. I think again, Professor Nalbat did make mention, this could be the shopping movement for India in that sense. If we want to use that opportunity, Indian market, in fact, Chinese are obsessed with getting access to Indian market, and they believe they could any evening sit down and sign a check for $200 billion of infrastructure building in India. And that is the kind of absorption that Indian market can hold. Now that market becomes India's leverage, particularly if we continue for the next 5 years with the political stability which we have seen in last 5-10 years. I think that kind of using of these leverages, both economic and political, will bring India advantage, and specific initiatives are already taking place. Mention, I think, was made of, in fact, we love acronyms now in India, and one could call it Jai Shri, which is Japan, Australia, India Supply Chain Resilience Initiative. That is already on the cards. Trade ministers are likely to meet. So there is going to be greater coordination of at least the periphery. I'm not saying United States necessarily will be part of it, but the middle powers surrounding the periphery of China, with South Korea, New Zealand, Vietnam, Indonesia, Japan, India, lots of these countries will find that they can complement each other together and kind of not only put restraint, and you've seen 27th June ASEAN for the first time talking of UNCLOS being the basis of how they should be, settling down the claims in South China Sea. This is the first time ASEAN has given a collective voice on how disputes in South China should be handled. Many of these countries are looking at India, which is shifting its strategy vis-a-vis China to internalizing asymmetry of the relationship to now standing up to China. And all of the periphery is watching India standing up to China, at least in certain border skirmishes that have happened. And I think next 5 years, we'll see China trying to repair the political damage that has happened because of COVID-19, shift its economy to high-intensive, high-technology areas. And of course, we'll see several other countries in the periphery, led by India to a certain extent, and of course by Japan post Shinzo Abe, we'll see that periphery coming together and building complementarities, including both not just economic, but geo-economic, where Quad, I think, is going to be really far more effective. The Quad Plus is becoming very attractive with addition of 3 other countries, and that India finds much more acceptable because India has always spoken of inclusive quadrilateral, inclusive Indo-Pacific. And I think we'll see again this larger canvas of contestations between China and India, where India will be now not moving back to informal summits very quickly, but building other kind of networks outside, both in terms of supply chains, value chains, but also geoeconomic political networks, to make sure that it is able to be part of that network to put restraint on China as it tries to bully around. The short-term strategy China is applying is to take advantage of other countries struggling with COVID-19. And that, in fact, is creating the groundswell of all of the countries coming together, because when you hurt a country in difficult times, the country doesn't forget that. And that is happening to entire periphery right now. So we will see that contestation of India-China taking an entirely new shape of a new equilibrium, chapter 2, where the focus of last 40 years from ensuring peace and tranquility on the border is going to shift now in restraining China's behavior. I think that is going to be the new strategy of India, and that is where India will collect and work together with several of these middle powers in the periphery, and of course will be then seen perhaps also inching closer to United States. But I think India is too large to become a shadow of United States. So we will see a greater play between India and the periphery of China, and therefore not internalizing asymmetry, but standing up to China, not simply managing borders, but now putting restraint on China across the periphery. You can see now Indian Navy going to South China Sea. So it's a very, very different kind of complex, broad-based strategy that India will develop to engage China in next 5 years. And I think that will bear fruit to a larger extent, because we are moving to a next stage of relationship with China after President Xi Jinping has taken over power. Old strategies have worked for last 40 years, will not deliver anymore. And I think this is a time of thinking afresh, and some of that thinking is happening. I could also make mention of increasing visibility of Lobsang Sangay, for example, increasing engagement with Taiwan, Indian Navy in South China Sea, a whole lot of larger canvas playing of our assets and leverages is happening already, and that will develop a new equilibrium between China and India. And I think we will continue to contest, but we will not push the envelope beyond a point between 2 countries, and that is how the relationship will change. Stability will continue, but I think the way we engage with each other will be very different in coming times. Thank you. I think I was almost running a roller coaster because we have a relay race and I think there are few people to speak after me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That's a very inspiring way of shifting the vision from the way China's used to picking off those in the periphery one by one to seeing, well, what happens if the periphery can come together and start to create the kind of alliances and interoperability that would make it very hard for China to continue to do that, especially in the context where, as you're describing, China's economy may be continuing to grow, and the economic infiltration into India is certainly quite deep already. So now we're going actually to our last speaker, Dr. Tiwari, if she's here, and if again you'd like to give us your view on how we can in 5 years be where you'd like us to be. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Cleo. Thank you, GCTC, for having me on the panel. The discussion on the future role of China in the economy is now at the forefront of strategic conversation in India. And I'm going to just put across four sort of thoughts in that sense to elaborate upon some of the fundamental questions that are crucial to this entire discussion. So my first question is, how are the geoeconomic realignments actually shaping at large in the world economy? And in response to that question, I think one needs to watch very closely the structural trends in global economy, which need to be monitored and assessed more acutely, particularly with respect to the nature of competition between the US and China, and by implication on the evolution of globalization per se, whether it's going to have a kind of going forward movement or it's going to go backward. The economic decoupling in that sense with China, therefore, cannot be indiscriminate without looking at these factors in world economy at large. And policymakers will really have to be conscious of the repercussions on domestic livelihoods and India's modernization efforts and geopolitical goals in the light of these shifting, realigning geo-economic, world economic parameters in that sense. The second question that I'm going to sort of focus upon is, to what extent will there be US-China decoupling in the near and medium term? So when we're talking about next 5 years vision for India, can we actually afford to be lopsided in terms of alliances in the era of geo-economic competition, which is unfolding both in Asia and at world level? Are we ready to absorb the manufacturing foreign direct investment, for instance, or assume a major role in global production networks? I mean, all of these factors need to be brought in, and India needs a high-tech industrialization moment, more quality manufacturing, more employment-generating supply-side capacities, and greater participation in international supply chains. I mean, all of these are our geo-economic goals in that sense. And greater, therefore, disruption in globalization is something that needs to be leveraged strategically and realistically when we talk about decoupling ourselves with China in that sense. Added to this kind of parameter is also another strategic goal for India, which is basically to re-establish its traditional commercial and social network with Indo-Pacific and Eurasia. So when we look at how we're going to decouple, of course, Indo-Pacific and Eurasia becomes very important for us. The US-China competition over high technology, particularly in digital sectors, is posing another kind of policy challenge. And for us to risk the risk that compromising data sovereignty or the dependence on imported software and hardware and the impact on domestic capabilities all remain same in either cases of the US or the China. So we need to support a framework for domestic innovation that promotes a competitive digital ecosystem for ourselves and one that moves India up the value chain. So these are some of the factors I've brushed through. I don't know if we'll have more time for any kind of discussion around these. And I'm going to bring the third major question that I see unfolding before us before we start making these kind of vision statements or even some sort of credible vision discussion regards to India's policy in geo-economic sector. The third question that is very crucial is, how should we restructure China's role in Indian economy? And for the past 6 years, the ruling government, the NDA government's approach has been to rebalance and broaden economic ties from a trade-dominated to an investment-oriented one. And this has been to manage the trade deficit and attract more Chinese investment and technologies to India. And today, India's dependence on China for its non-consumption economy remains high, as inputs, components, industrial equipments, and technology all feed into India's growth and export to the rest of the world. And other speakers have actually mentioned about that. A deeper assessment may be the need of the proverbial hour more than any abrupt decoupling, therefore. And we need to determine the cost-benefit calculations and impacts across sectors and for the economy as a whole. Only after this has yielded any kind of credible data will the policymakers be able to formulate a plan to continuing interdependence with China, either in select sectors or lessen it in others by import substitution or sourcing from somewhere else. It cannot be a blanket policy of decoupling as it were. We need to articulate a sophisticated industrialization blueprint in that sense, and therefore sort of factor in whether Beijing brings any kind of value or can be replaced in a particular sector. The fourth and final point that I'm going to make is India's future connection with Indo-Pacific, which is a huge consideration. The decision on regional comprehensive economic partnership suggests that India is not really in a hurry to lock into any kind of trading bloc, while its domestic economy remains somewhat engaged in structural problems. A slowdown in China-US economic ties has not undermined China's connections with Asia. So China-Asia interdependence is still there. And last year, if we look at ASEAN overtaking US to emerge as China's second largest trading partner with a whopping $644 billion two-way commerce, this point is brought home very strongly. So far, in 2020, ASEAN has also overtaken the European Union to become China's largest trading partner. So China-Asia equation in that sense is going from strength to strength. The investment flows that support such a commerce are less visible, but nonetheless very real. And therefore, this is what sort of, brings me to the scenario of China's economic links with its continental and maritime neighbors, which are more deepening and more probable, probably going to be more strong if the US does not re-engage Asia with a more credible economic blueprint. And India can benefit from all of this competition between US and China if it plays its cards carefully. We need to access more geoeconomic networks, more gateways and linkages that develop around our own region. And while China's relationship is likely to remain competitive and complex with its Asian neighbors, if a grand strategic goal is deepening, its ties with Asia, then India has to acquire the ability to conceive geoeconomic strategies in the immediate neighborhood, while recognizing that the other states are not going to deprive themselves of economic ties with either mainland China or going to let go of an opportunity that India might be presenting or the US might be presenting. And therefore, many Asian states, including India's neighbors, will adopt a very eclectic mix of geoeconomic strategies in terms of leveraging US, Chinese, Japanese, European technologies and capitals and networks, access to realignments of geoeconomy and if I may, geostrategy. And therefore, we must not lose out on our competitive advantages and future position in Asia in such a scenario, which is very much in flux. And I'm just going to rest here and maybe invite some comments if we are left with any time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tiwari. That was very structured and focused and appreciated, and answered a lot of the questions about potential policy ways forward. We don't have a lot of time. We have about 8 minutes. So what I'll do is I'll go backwards through the panel and ask you that same question that we had before, which is, if you're a prime minister and you could get one policy passed today to get part of what you're talking about where you want to be in 5 years, what would it be? So Dr. Tiwari, start off.
Certainly, I'm not gonna sort of get into this idea of being the prime minister for a day or any day in that sense, but I'm just gonna put my one penny across in that sense. I think this is the time for a policy or a vision document for next 5 years in terms of where we are locating our economy, both at the regional level and also at the world level. So what we are actually missing or are waiting for is basically a vision document. And I cannot stress enough that we really need a blueprint of industrialization sector, of manufacturing sector, of all sectors in our economy in a very, very, staggered manner. If we have one policy in place, we know better where we stand vis-a-vis in our trade deals with what the US has to offer, what we need to let go of in terms of our engagements with China, and what we need to have on the table in the short term, and how we can make certain replacements and reassessments. Without a blueprint, I think that's a task which is really, really humongous and may not really be well planned, as it were. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. And I should say that the inspiration for this question comes from Major General Malhotra, who, of course, would have to plan operations and deliver. And so you'd need to have very concrete idea of where you're heading. So in order to do that, as you say, you need to start off with a larger plan, and then you figure out the strategy first, and then the tactics. We're going back to the same order. So Professor Singh, do you have what are your strategy or tactics for the next 5 years?
You're making us prime minister for one day.
There have been prime ministers who've been prime minister for less. Yeah.
I think two things. One, given the fact that we are in the middle of COVID-19, obviously all 24 hours would be spent on thinking of how better we can deal with COVID-19. But on China, I think it's not a normal neighbor of India. I would suggest that, there is a need. We should now begin a process of developing, on a certain frequency, white papers on China policy. Government should come out with a clear thinking on what it believes it wishes to do vis-a-vis China. So, like several other countries, including United States, they issue strategy papers. China issues white papers. I think we need to also begin a kind of a series of white papers on China, so that there's a clear idea as to where we are going, because a lot of what we talk about China remains in the unknown. So, we never talk about the kind of economic intertwining that already has occurred between China and India. And I think we keep talking about China as an adversary, whereas China also is so deep into Indian economy, especially in e-commerce. So a holistic, clear vision of where government of India wishes to take China's relationship would be clear if there's a white paper issued on a certain frequency of 2 years or 5 years, so that the whole nation knows. And I think we need to build constituencies within the country, because relationship with China is going to be a long haul of contestations. And unless we have constituencies supporting the politicians on this, I think we will not be doing much favor to politicians themselves standing on their own to deal with China. So white papers is what I would take a decision that we should start irregular white papers on China policy.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kathuria?
Thanks, Cleo. So I start with a disclaimer that I won't say what I'm saying in the capacity of being a prime minister, but in the capacity of an economist. So I think my suggestion would be and I'll elaborate on this, we should put our house in order. The Ohio principle, let's put our house in order, let's put our economy in order. And what I mean by that is, our economy had begun to decline even before COVID. COVID has just accentuated the decline in the economy. And there are two sort of things that come out very clearly, that we are not a very inclusive economy, and a lot of our workers are in the informal sector, and therefore, lack social security and all that sort of associated infrastructure that we should have, and that we are not a very sustainable economy in a sort of climate sustainable sense. So this is an opportunity to sort of set an economy right, put our own house in order, and not be afraid of articulating an industrial policy in India, a sort of a clever and a smart industrial policy that sort of complies with our global engagements and our multilateral engagements. And here I would like to stress that we do all of this with an eye and not shed our ambivalence towards globalization, which is the sort of point I made in my opening remarks. So use globalization, learn from China, but also use it for the benefit of the domestic, and shed this ambivalence that current account deficits are bad, we should run surpluses with individual countries. We should have a clear strategy on globalization, but there is no difference between globalization and domestic policy today. So all of this should be internalized, and we should have this, and we should follow through with this. I mean, these fluctuations and volatility of policy over time, this uncertainty that we create is not good for domestic investment, is not good for foreign investment. So my sort of blueprint, or my sort of putting my own house in order, putting our house in order, is to have an industrial policy that looks at sustainability, that looks at inclusion, and that leverages globalization. And it's not as if I'm talking in the air. All this is possible. It can be done. And once we've got this, we should follow through. The Achilles heel of India, Cleo, if you've been here long enough, the Achilles heel of India has always been in execution and implementation. I think in terms of policy, we have the options, we have the sort of human capital to be able to create those policies, and even inclusive policies. I think we've often fallen foul in terms of implementation, And I think implementation suffers because of federalism as well, because a lot of policies have made at the center fall foul at the states, and some of the policies are made at the states. So all of this, I think I'm articulating something what the Planning Commission used to do, but focus on also execution and implementation.
Thank you very much. And I think that often globalization is seen as apart from alliances, but it can be incorporated into the sort of alliances that have been spoken about. For example, the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative and that sort of thing. So we have 4 minutes left. Professor Nalapat, do you have any specific policy recommendations, things that need to happen to get us where we should be?
Well, Cleo, I'd like to say that not being a Raja ever, but hopefully in some small way a Rajguru. And if I were Rajguru for a day, 2 things I would stress. One is freedom of speech. I was delighted when the Supreme Court gave the very large sum of ₹1 as a fine for Prashant Bhushan after his comments. And I was very happy that Prashant Bhushan respectfully accepted that. I think that is an important firebreak in the question of freedom of speech. And I do believe that we must have a much higher tolerance to freedom of speech in India. You know, the play of ideas. I mean, if you remember back, Chairman Mao said, let 100 schools contend and let 1,000 flowers bloom. Well, the flowers were cut off soon after they bloom. But my point is, you need to have a culture in which you tolerate free speech. And in that, in our country, it's way too easy to have legal troubles on that. The second point would be transparency. The RTI, for example, is, the UPA introduced RTI and then filled the RTI with people who have spent 30, 35 years, basically preventing information from reaching anybody except themselves. So you have to improve transparency. Freedom of speech and transparency may be unpleasant. It may be sometimes inconvenient, but the reality is you cannot create a modern knowledge society. You cannot have the play of ideas and the play of opportunities in the manner you need in India if you do not have a high degree of tolerance for freedom of speech and a high level of transparency. So if I were ever a small way Rajguru, these are the 2 requests that I would make of the Raja.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. General Singh, Lieutenant General Singh, would you like to bring us home on this important topic?
I'll do rapid fire. First thing is give priority to economic development over social engineering. Country can do social engineering a little later. Currently, we seem to be caught up in that. Second is bring up your delivery mechanisms. Whatever policies you have, without a delivery system, that means revamp this damn administrative structure. It is not delivering. It is suboptimal. Third thing is build consensus in the country and decouple the narrative which is internal and external. For elections, you have a different range of issues. Don't talk of this that China ko main ye kar dunga. This is not a domestic election issue. It's a issue which is built on the national consensus and should be deliberated by mature people in policy formulations. That doesn't have to be gone and done in Bhagalpur elections of MLA ki Cheen ko ye kar denge. Sorry to use Hindi, but you follow some Hindi. And fourth is grow from inward to outward. Don't start punching for everybody. You start building your things around your neighbors and grow from that way. And stop doing this, telling everybody what to do. Get involved with them and do it with them. And strategic decoupling, defense policy has to be laid down, and we have to have a functional procurement system. And last thing, be like Deng Xiaoping. Talk less, do more, build a big stick, and bide for your time. But our time will come. There is a Hindi movie thing, Mera Waqt Bhi Aayega. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our time has come. We're right at the end, and it's very difficult to summarize everything that was said because it shows how complex this issue is of handling China. And one of the first things that needs to be done, obviously, is, as all of the panelists have said, is look at India and figure out how to strengthen India going forward and its alliances. And the time is now. As Professor Nalapat said, we have an opportunity. India has an opportunity now like it hasn't had in the past. Countries are looking to India for leadership and guidance and relationships. And I really hope that this sort of discussion continues and that India can move ahead and we can be where you think we should be in 5 years. And I also hope that the family of Major General Malhotra has found that in some very small way, some of his spirit has infused us today. And we're very, very grateful for this opportunity to come together in his honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cleo ma'am, and I'd like to thank all the speakers for their, all the esteemed speakers for their very educational, for all their educational words. I'm sure the audience had a lot to learn from this session. So I would like to thank the audience for their patience, especially since we did go a little over time. And I'd like to thank Cleo ma'am for being a wonderful moderator and all the speakers. Thanks a lot. And to end it, I would encourage the audience as well as the speakers to please follow us on all our social media handles. So you could get an easier information for the future conferences and webinars. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.